Chapter 187. Chapter 187 Fear. Zhang Ruan had no clear recollection of how she finally managed to fall asleep that night. Since Zhao Mei's death, she had almost never had the opportunity to sleep in the same bed with someone else. Lying on the large bed, with someone sleeping next to her, should have been cause for alarm. Yet, after she took up the dagger Xiao Xiao had gifted her, she did not stash it under her pillow. Instead, she stored it in a small box. From her perspective, sharing the bed with someone, getting married, was not a warm experience. For example, in her previous life, Zhao Mei and Zhang Quan lay in the same bed, but had very different dreams. Furthermore, she herself had hoped to do the same with Xian Li, but the bedfellow that she dreamed of was the very person who had hoodwinked her in the end. She was very nervous at first, but Xiao Xiao had closed his eyes very quickly and slept peacefully and quietly, such that Zhang Ruan could not help being surprised. Since he was the leader of the genie guard, Zhang Ruan could not believe that he was someone who could let down his guard. However, this young man was totally at ease as he slept, as if being beside her was the safest place in the world. As she continued to observe him, Zhang Ruan felt herself gradually calming down, and her complicated thoughts and emotions settled into a state of tranquility that she had never experienced before. The red wedding candles wept silently and time moved on. At this moment, the bridal chamber held no air of flaming affection, nor of romance, but a kind of neutral warmth and comfort. It was as if all the deep-seated hatred and inhuman cold-bloodedness had been tamed by the brightness of the celebration to become a mere wisp of smoke and flame. At dawn, Zhang Ruan opened her eyes when the first faint ray of light entered the room, and was surprised that she had slept soundly through the night. Unconsciously, she turned her head, and the first image that met her eyes was the incomparably handsome visage of that young man. Perhaps because she had just woken up and was still at ease, Zhang Ruan didn't think about why she didn't look away, and so naturally turned her body and propped her chin up with one hand so that she could assess the young man before her in detail. Xiao Xiao slept peacefully, and his sleeping posture was very good, possibly due to good training when he was a child. Even in his sleep, he exhibited an air of noble elegance. On top of that, this elegance was a few degrees less cold and detached than when he was awake, and had a kind of gentle grace. Her gaze slid down, following the line of Xiao Xiao's long, delicate, and perfectly straight eyelashes, skated across the line of his extremely straight nose, down his thin lips, his knife-cut jawline, and finally landed on his fair, jade-like collarbone. This man had truly been born good-looking. The sunlight slanted into the room, adding a faint golden glow to his appearance, and causing him to look almost godlike in his beauty. At some time during the night, his snow-white inner clothes had parted, exposing his skin, as white as porcelain and as lustrous as jade. Because his skin was mostly concealed under his clothes, there was an irresistible urge to reach out a hand and touch it. Zhang Ruan stared at his skin in a bit of a daze, her mind seemingly muddled, as her hand stretched out to touch. Where her hand made contact, the skin was smooth and firm, slightly cool to the touch, like a first-rate bolt of silk. It was a truly comfortable feeling. Like what you see? A low, husky voice sounded abruptly in her ear, causing her to start in shock and retract her hand like lightning. When did Xiao Xiao wake up? He glanced at her with a half-smile before sitting up and gathering his collar. Zhang Ruan had already been somewhat ashamed, but when she observed his final movement she felt a little anxious. Why did this situation look like she had lustily forced herself on a young man from a good family? What was with that expression on Xiao Xiao's face? Had she come on to him aggressively? Xiao Xiao was delighted at how she looked, as if she had swallowed a fly. His mouth lifted at the corners, and he reached out to pat her on the head. Perhaps because the sensation was quite nice, he stroked her hair a few times before saying nonchalantly, "Shall we call your maidservants to enter?" "No need," Zhang Ruan said as she sat up. She was only wearing her snow-white inner garments, and she ignored Xiao Xiao as she took clothes out of the box and walked behind the screen. In the morning, the screen displayed its usual image of mandarin ducks playing in the water. Even so, as Zhang Ruan walked past and noticed the wedding clothes draped over the screen, she remembered the previous night's embarrassing situation and could not help feeling a little breathless. For some reason, she did not call Lian Xiao and the others in because she was unwilling to let others see how she and Xiao Xiao were interacting the day after. She knew it was unnecessary and pointless, But Xiao Xiao was, in the end, a man and nothing had happened on their wedding night. Therefore, it would be difficult to be comfortable in front of others no matter what. While musing, Zhang Ruan changed her clothes and walked out from behind the screen to find that Xiao Xiao had also already changed. Because it was the day after their nuptials and they were entering the palace to visit Empress Dowager, Xiao Xiao could not wear his customary black clothes. Instead, he selected pale red court robes, on which the embroidered white python was baring its fangs menacingly, lending him an aristocratic air. Although his natural demeanor was both cold and detached, the robes made him appear to be like a jade-like noble, with an extraordinary temperament and the righteousness of a young pine tree. Zhang Ruan had also donned a magenta-colored jacket and skirt on which were scattered white butterfly lanterns. Her collar was stitched round with fluffy white rabbit fur, and her small face, no bigger than one's palm, was rendered even more exquisite, while her beautiful eyes sparkled infinitely as they moved. In this way, the two of them looked to be wearing matching outfits. Zhang Ruan felt it was somewhat strange that Xiao Xiao did not require anyone to wait upon him, but having thought about it further, she concluded that he was accustomed to executing all sorts of tasks, and was definitely not one of those young masters who insisted on being waited upon hand and foot, and even being fed. But then she saw that his collar was still open and walked over to help him close it. She performed this action very naturally, but Xiao Xiao was slightly taken aback. While Zhang Ruan dipped her head, her natural scent was impossible to ignore. Her fingertips, fair and unblemished, tidied his collar with tenderness and delicacy, such that Xiao Xiao felt his insides go soft for no reason, and the urge to kiss her forehead presented itself strongly. The idea had no sooner popped into his head than Lian Xiao's voice was heard outside, asking, "Miss, are you awake? This servant has brought hot water." Xiao Xiao paused and Zhang Ruan called out, "Come in." Lian Xiao and Baiji entered bearing basins of water. When they saw Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao's movements, they were taken aback. Lian Xiao lowered her head to fight back her smile, and merely remarked that Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan indeed looked like an ordinary married couple. She had initially been anxious when her young miss had met Xiao Xiao, with his cold personality, thinking that relations between them would be respectful but frosty. However, when she walked in just now, the expression on Xiao Xiao's face as he beheld their young miss had indubitably been full of tenderness. Baiji's temperament was calmer. She looked towards the bed and saw that it was neat and tidy, with no sign of any stain on the handkerchief star. Immediately, she understood what had or had not transpired, and did not know whether she should be nervous or relieved. Her face momentarily betrayed her complicated emotions. Yuan Pa. Handkerchief stained with the bride's blood from the wedding night, used as proof of the bride's prior chastity, as the blood would be from her torn hymen. There were only two reasons why the handkerchief was not produced: the bride had not been a virgin, or the newlyweds had not consummated their marriage yet. But no matter what, in the end this was Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao's private matter. Before the two of them had finished freshening up, Steward Lin had already sent someone with their breakfast. It was simple, plain congee with a few side dishes, but every dish was exquisite and refined. Steward Lim himself entered the room and his eyes promptly darted everywhere around the room. When he saw the wedding clothes draped over the screen, his face paled, then turned further green when he took in the neatly arranged bedding. After his face had changed color a few times, he could no longer repress a long sigh as he looked at Xiao Xiao. He was so close to beating his chest and stamping his feet. Xiao Xiao did not even look up, and did not even seem to realize Steward Lin's attitude. Zhang Ruan would also not react to Steward Lin of her own accord. This old rascal had no self-restraint or self-respect, and was always speaking outrageously. Even Zhang Ruan was constantly rendered speechless by his words. With his current state of mind, Steward Lin was already on the verge of collapse, so Zhang Ruan buried her head in her breakfast and did not spare him a glance. With this cold shoulder, Steward Lin felt the heavy blow to his self-esteem and stomped off in a huff. Once outside, as he looked up at the sun, tears sprang to his eyes unbidden. He bawled, "Master Furin, this old servant has disappointed you. How was it?" Jean Eyre jumped down from the roof beam with a whoosh and asked, "No intense steamy actions?" "Not a damn thing." Steward Lin responded furiously to the question. He said, Young master and young foreign are so innocent that it's impossible for anyone to be more innocent than they are. The passion-filled scenes that everyone had anticipated never materialized. So why had Xiao Xiao left orders earlier that no one was to be allowed to eavesdrop outside the bridal chamber? No one would be willing to keep watch over the bridal chamber only to see this pair sleeping with the comforter over them, causing their entire band of servants to suffer a sleepless night to no avail. Young master, please grow a heart. I knew it, Jean Eyre crowed in exultation. Looking at his colleagues above him, he stretched out his hand and said, if you agree to bet, you must be prepared to admit defeat. If you agree to bet, you must be prepared to admit defeat. How much did you all bet yesterday? He had really made a bet on what Xiao Xiao would do with Zhang Ruan in the bridal chamber. When he heard this, Steward Lin was even more incensed and instantly bellowed, no gathering people for betting pools in the Wangfu. As he thought about the situation with Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan, he could not help feeling deeply worried once again. That screen and such a beauty like Zhang Ruan would have been enough for any gentleman. Could it be that his master had some problems in that area? Terrified at the very idea, Steward Lin wiped the sweat off his brow and quietly resolved to ask Xia Qing all about it later and demand some medicines to try. After breakfast, Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao intended to enter the palace to visit Empress Dowager Ida, and the horse carriage standing outside had been prepared earlier. Although Steward Lin was full of regrets about the non-consummation of their marriage, he had nevertheless made arrangements for the first days after the wedding with extreme care. As expected, the horse carriage was once again Steward Lin's style, extravagantly ostentatious. After Zhang Ruan seated herself in the horse carriage, she could not help but ask the question in her heart. Is the Wangfu very rich? How can Steward Lin spend money with such an open hand? Jining Wangfu's ledgers, past and current, had all been given to Zhang Ruan to examine. Although one could say that the Wangfu was rich, understandably, she could not gauge the total amount of wealth it had. Thus she did not have a clear picture about all of the matters pertaining to the management of the Wangfu. Xiao Xiao had grown accustomed to seeing Zhang Ruan's customary astute nature. It seemed there was nothing on this earth which she could not do, and it was rare indeed that there was something she did not know how to handle. Even in his amazement he felt that Zhang Ruan like this was rather adorable. With a smile he replied, there is a lot of money. His words, spoken in a deadpan fashion, annoyed Zhang Ruan. She had originally thought that the richest household was the imperial household, but if the steward of Xiao Xiao's Fu could spend money so generously, then there are those who are rich and those who are filthy rich. She glanced again at Xiao Xiao and, emboldened by anger, smiled and said, so much money, how much do you plan to share with me? Her original intention was to tease Xiao Xiao. She never imagined that he would look at her silently for a moment before saying, all the money in the Wangfu is in your hands. However much you want, you can have Wangfei. The last word Wangfei was pronounced clearly, and Xiao Xiao had even slowed down deliberately. The voice was distinct and mellow, causing one's heart to skip a beat. The corners of Zhang Ruan's mouth lifted slightly, and Xiao Xiao gazed at her steadily, his pitch-black eyes sparkling as if embedded with little diamonds, and with a hint of amusement. Zhang Ruan turned her head, coughed lightly and said, many thanks. When the two of them entered the palace to see Empress Dowager Ida, she appeared to be very happy. Over the past few years, Empress Dowager Ida had increasingly shown a more benign side in front of Zhang Ruan. Today, Xiao Xiao and Zhang Ruan arrived together, and perhaps because Empress Dowager Ida viewed them as a perfect couple, a title which she had bestowed with great satisfaction, she kept telling Yang Gugu, look at this pair, a talented man and a beautiful lady, such a well-matched couple, looking so fine together. Seeing the both of you so well suited for one another, Aijia is truly perfectly content. Although Zhang Ruan had yet to consummate her marriage with Xiao Xiao, this was something Empress Dowager Ida could absolutely not know about. Consequently, in Xianing Palace, she behaved in a shy and tender manner, like a new bride who was dearly loved by her husband. Nothing looked amiss at a glance, but this act seemed to somewhat shock Xiao Xiao, for there was a stiffness to his expression. Empress Dowager Ida treated them with great generosity. Apart from the congratulatory gifts she had sent before the wedding, on their visit today, she conferred another set of rewards. Moreover, she was obviously in high spirits. Zhang Ruan noticed that there was something different in the way Empress Dowager Ida looked at Xiao Xiao. This was not the way one would treat a regular court official. Her eyes looked like those of a grandmother gazing upon her grandson, full of affectionate devotion. Because Zhang Ruan had been with Empress Dowager Ida for a period of time, and had more or less come to a clearer understanding of Empress Dowager Ida's temperament, witnessing such a situation gave rise to both surprise and suspicion, but she showed no sign of this. Upon leaving Xianing Palace, the emperor's personal eunuch Li, sent someone with the message that the emperor had some matters to discuss with Xiao Xiao. As it was certainly a discussion of court affairs, Zhang Ruan had no reason to go with him. Eunuch Li further hinted that this discussion could take quite a long time, so Zhang Ruan told Xiao Xiao to go on ahead. She would be fine leaving the palace and taking the horse carriage home. She had lived in the palace for a period of time, so she knew her way around without having to send for any palace maids. With Lian Xiao and Bai Ji, she set off to exit the palace. They had just reached the promenade of the Imperial Flower Garden when they saw two beautiful women in palace garb walking towards them from a distance. The two young ladies also saw them, and before Zhang Ruan could say anything, one of the young ladies called out in surprise, "De Jiejia." It was Zhang Dan. Today, she was wearing an apricot-color silk brocade dress embroidered with white cranes in flight, with tinkling ornaments looped around her waist. Her jewelry looked quite valuable. It seemed that her life in the palace was pretty good, so the news of her gaining the emperor's favor was true, after all. The dress of the woman with Zhang Dan was a shade inferior, and her formerly lovable expression was now exactly the same as the smiles on the faces of every palace lady, imbued with several degrees of pretense, such that one's true self could not easily be seen. This was Dong Yinger. Oh. Zhang Dan looked at Zhang Ruan and smiled, giving the appearance of friendliness. She said, "De Jiejia, Dan Yang was unable to leave the palace to present you with your wedding gift during the festivities last night, and is truly ashamed. However, Dan Yang sent someone with the gift, perhaps De Jiejia liked it?" It was merely a set of jewelry. Zhang Ruan had looked briefly at it before asking someone to toss it into the box. She smiled faintly and said, "I like noble consort Zhang's present very much. Thank you." "No need to be so courteous," Zhang Dan said as she pulled at Zhang Ruan's hand. "You and I are sisters from the same fu, so naturally we have to support one another. Of course, I am very happy that you have become the Jining Wangfu's Wang Fei." Zhang Ruan did not want to waste her breath on Zhang Dan. To deal with such an annoying person as Zhang Dan, she simply stood to one side, totally at ease without saying anything. Zhang Dan had never done anything for no reason, so today's encounter was absolutely not because she wanted to reminisce with Zhang Ruan or curry favor. She had to have an intention. Why not find out what she really wanted? Sure enough, Zhang Dan caught her slightly impatient expression and smiled all of a sudden. She said, "Speaking of which, people's opportunities are so different." At that time, when De Jiejia returned from the rural residence, to say something that may be crossing boundaries, back then, how many people were waiting for De Jiejia to become a laughingstock? De Jiejia unexpectedly is now hung in Junju and Jining Wangfei. Then eldest brother left home for so many years without any news of him, and suddenly he has become a great general with outstanding meritorious service. On the other hand, second sister and mother have long become dead bones. Just like 13th Highness in this place. Initially he was just an unremarkable prince, but now he is under the emperor's protection. It is indeed thought-provoking how a person's fate can change so drastically. If there really is reincarnation, who knows how the situation will change? Zhang Ruan's eyes flashed on hearing these words and she glared at Zhang Dan closely. Slowly she said, "What did you say?" "I said, if there really is reincarnation, how will the situation change? Will it be a completely different fate? What end will De Jiejia come to?" Zhang Dan's tone was sweet, but she had lowered her voice, and there was something odd about it. Seeing the sudden change in Zhang Ruan's expression, Zhang Dan giggled and said, casually, "Dan Yang has something else to do and won't chat with De Jiejia any longer. De Jiejia goes safely." Having said this, she turned and left. Dong Yinger lowered her gaze, which had never been directly trained on Zhang Ruan, and left as well. In the horse carriage on the way back to the Jining Wangfu, Zhang Ruan stared unblinkingly at the little table in front of her, while Lian Xiao and Bai Ji stared at her nervously. Ever since Zhang Dan had spoken with Zhang Ruan, Zhang Ruan had been rather distracted, and her grave expression caused Lien Xiao and Baiji to feel that something was off. Zhang Ruan was naturally bewildered and suspicious. Zhang Dan's words were loaded. They would not have signified anything to someone else, but to her, they were like a bolt from the blue. Zhang Ruan had hidden the secret of her rebirth deep in her heart, a secret that no one had been able to touch. Today, to hear such words from Zhang Dan's mouth was surprising. Zhang Dan would not have spoken such words for no reason. What had she discovered? Could it be that she also had been reborn? She was lost in thought, with her brows tightly knitted. In Lien Xiao and Baiji's eyes, this was something highly unusual. Zhang Ruan had never expressed her emotions, whether of joy or anger. Even if she had encountered some earth-shaking situation, no sign of perturbation could be seen on her face. Now she was staring at the little table in front of her, but her gaze was unfocused, as if she was lost in frenzied thought, such that Lien Xiao was even able to sense some part of her foreboding. This was truly too peculiar. "Why do I feel as if Miss is possessed?" Lien Xiao whispered to Baiji. "What did fourth Miss say just now to cause Miss to be so keyed up? I didn't hear anything that sounded wrong." Baiji's expression was solemn as she said, "I don't know why, but I feel some kind of dread." Zhang Ruan felt the more she seriously pondered the crucial point, the greater the chaos in her mind, such that she could not clearly understand even what Lien Xiao and Baiji were saying right next to her. Zhang Dan's words were like a curse, and what was reverberating inside her mind and driving her mad was the memory of her previous life. The news of Zhang Xinji's death, being dragged out of the main palace hall by Zhang Quan, falling down the 9 steps in a sorry state, hearing them coldly declare that she was the demoness causing national calamity, watching Zhang Susu's crazed expression. That was when she had been made a human swine, and witnessed with her own eyes Pear struggling and crying out as he was beaten to death with rods, until she had finally been made to take poison. The scenes revolved endlessly in her mind, round and round, each one stained with blood and tears. The terror of what she had not yet gained and what she had already lost flooded her, and she could only feel her hysteria growing, and a fretful anxiety encircled her for no reason. Miss, what's wrong with you?" Lien Xiao said as she patted her back anxiously. Zhang Ruan was staring fixedly, but her expression was frantic. Her throat filled with an unexpected sweetness and she spat out a mouthful of fresh blood with a pu on the snow-white tablecloth of the little table in front of her, the spray of blood standing out in shocking contrast. In the very next second, Lien Xiao shrieked. Chapter 188. Chapter 188, Her Inner Demons. Steward Lin had just asked for a prescription from Xia Qing, and was instructing his servants to get the medicine when he saw the genieing Wangfu's carriage returning in haste. He wondered why they were returning this early. Then the curtain was lifted from inside, and Lien Xiao and Baiji half supported and half carried a person out. When he went over to take a closer look, he was shocked to see that it was none other than Zhang Ruan. Even though Steward Lin was a little less than half a century old, his eyes were still sharp. At a glance he noticed the blood on the corner of Zhang Ruan's lips, and his heart skipped a beat. Furthermore, he realized that Xiao Xiao had not returned with her. So he immediately hurried over while asking, "What's going on? What's wrong with young Furen?" "Young Furen has passed out," Baiji replied anxiously. "Steward Lin, please ask someone to help young Furen to her room and call a physician." Steward Lin became anxious when he heard this. Wasn't this the first day after their wedding? How did this incident happen? Thinking that there was a divine physician in the adjacent mansion, he immediately sent someone to invite Xia Qing to come and check her. After helping Zhang Ruan into the room to lie down, Steward Lin pelted Lien Xiao with questions. "What happened to young Furen? Why did she faint? How do you take care of young Furen?" Lu Zhu and Tianzhu rushed over after they heard about Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan didn't have any other wounds on her body, and it didn't look like she was injured. Lien Xiao blamed herself. Miss met fourth Miss in the palace, and had a short conversation with her. However, upon returning to the carriage, she was not herself. It was as if she was possessed because she sat in a daze for a while, and then suddenly vomited blood and passed out. "What did fourth Miss say to Wang Fei?" Tianzhu demanded. "They just generally talked about fates and favorable circumstances in life. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary." Lian Xiao frowned. As she was talking with Tianju, she saw Xiaoqing and Qifeng hurrying in. Just a few minutes ago they had been discussing when to leave the capital, but encountered the servants of the Jining Wangfu. The servants told them something had happened to Zhang Ruan, and relayed the urgent request to have Xiaoqing check on Zhang Ruan. At first Xiaoqing thought that everyone in the Jining Wangfu was exaggerating, and making a mountain out of a molehill. As a result, when he came in and saw Zhang Ruan lying on the bed with her eyes tightly closed, he was stunned for a moment. Qifeng's face also changed and he asked, "How did third sister-in-law become like this?" "Oh, young Master Xia." Steward Lin hurriedly pulled Xiaoqing towards the bedside and said, "Please hurry and take a look. I fear that young foreign has been vexed by someone, causing her to vomit blood, which is absolutely terrible. It would be horrible if she has harmed her body at such a young age." From Lian Xiao's words, Zhang Ruan did not suffer any kind of knife wound, but was angered by Zhang Dan's few words. Although he didn't understand why she was so angry, it clearly explained how she had fallen into such a state. Xiaoqing frowned, walked to the edge of the bed and sat down, then reached out to check Zhang Ruan's pulse. Everyone observed him nervously. After a while, Xiaoqing let go of her wrist and Qifeng asked nervously, "Fifth brother Xia, what's the matter?" "Third sister-in-law is agitated. She has a long-standing illness and was incited by someone today, which has caused her to suffer a deep emotional trauma, thus making her spit out a mouthful of bad blood. There is a blood clot stuck in her chest preventing her from waking up right now." Xiaoqing hesitated to speak and finally shook his head and said, "I'll prescribe the medicine first. Steward Lin, find someone to concoct it and then have third sister-in-law drink it immediately." Although he spoke lightly, there was no sign of relaxation between his brows and he seemed a little grave, which was not a usual thing for Xiaoqing, who was known as Jinling Divine Physician. The few words spoken by Lian Xiao, along with Xiaoqing's worried looks, made Qifeng anxious. Steward Lin didn't dare to delay, so he immediately sent someone to brew the medicine. Sitting in the room, Xiaoqing looked at Zhang Ruan with a tense expression, wondering what she was thinking. Qifeng stood by the window, looking up from time to glance at Zhang Ruan. Several maids were bustling about, but Zhang Ruan didn't show any signs of waking up. About half an hour later, the door of the room was suddenly pushed open, and a gust of cold winter air was brought in from outside. Xiao Xiao strode in, his body still covered with unmelted snow. He walked to the bed, looked at Zhang Ruan's tightly closed eyes and was startled. Immediately, he then turned his head towards Lian Xiao and Baizhi, and asked coldly what happened. Lian Xiao and Baizhi looked at each other, but Baizhi had no choice but to repeat the explanation she had already given to everyone else. Just after Guy and Miss separated, Miss met fourth Miss in the palace, and spoke briefly with fourth Mississippi. After she returned to the carriage, she sat for a while in a daze, then vomited the blood and suddenly fainted. Diving physician Xia said that it happened because of Miss' old illness. After a pause, Baizhi said again, "But when did Miss have any old illness?" Xiao Xiao was startled, and looked at Xiaoqing who stood to the side. He remained silent, then asked Lian Xiao, "What did Zhang Dan say to her? Tell me everything without leaving out a single sentence." His tone was cold, his eyes were dark and filled with deep anger. Lian Xiao's heart trembled, and she repeated every word spoken between Zhang Dan and Zhang Ruan. After that she said, "That's all. However, if this servant dares to say something, I can't think of anything strange about their words." But once she was in the carriage, Miss seemed to have remembered something disturbing and seemed very afraid. "This servant has been with Miss for many years, and since we returned to the capital a few years ago, I have never seen Miss so scared of anything." Hearing this, Qifeng looked at Lian Xiao inquisitively, but Xiao Xiao tightened his hands, as if he stood there thinking for a moment, then turned around and was about to leave when Qifeng grabbed him. "Third brother Xiao, what do you want to do?" "To untie the bell, we need the person who tied it. This matter has something to do with Zhang Dan, so we should naturally look for her," Xiao Xiao said. "What can you do now? With a few words, she can't be convicted of any crime." Qifeng glanced at Zhang Ruan. "Are you going to kill her now? This will only bring trouble to third sister-in-law." Qifeng's words revealed the anxiousness in his heart as he thought of Zhang Ruan and tried to put himself in her shoes, But Xiao Xiao's eyes froze when he heard those words. He looked at him and said coldly, "This is my wife. There's no need for you to worry for her." Qi Feng's throat stung but he couldn't speak, and his expression was a bit awkward. But Xia Qing also stood up, with a seriousness that didn't match his age written all over his baby face. "Stop arguing. Third brother Xiao, third sister-in-law is not angry because of other people's words, although that might have happened out of coincidence, but what caused her to look like this is because she has been poisoned." Qi Feng loosened his grip on Xiao Xiao's hand and asked incredulously, "Poisoned?" "Impossible," Xiao Xiao said. "No one can do anything in the Wangfu. Everything here was handled by Steward Lin himself, and it was impossible for the guards in the Jinying Wangfu to betray them either. Poisoning Zhang Ruan was more difficult than killing her directly. She wasn't poisoned in the Wangfu." Xia Qing shook his head. "This poison has been in her body for more than 10 years. It seems that she might have even been affected by this poison in the womb. However, for some reason it has remained dormant for several years, so the poison has remained undetected. Consequently, it has accumulated in the body. Now someone has used something to trigger this poison. As for the incident that took place in the palace, this made third sister-in-law so agitated that it made the poison accumulated in her body flow faster." He hesitated for a moment and said, "It seems that there are other intentions behind this move, but at the moment I can't think of one." Fifth brother Xia. Qi Feng didn't care about confronting Xiao Xiao, and said anxiously, "Will the medicine you prescribe be effective? Can you undo the effects of this poison on third sister-in-law?" It's not that he didn't have confidence in Xia Qing, but after being fellow sect brothers for so many years, Qi Feng had already understood every expression of Xia Qing. As a divine physician, Xia Qing had a sense of achievement filled with excitement and crazed passion when treating patients, and his eyes were always full of confidence. It was the first time he had seen him show such an anxious and nervous expression, which really made Qi Feng feel uneasy. Xiao Xiao also stared closely at Xia Qing, not to mention Bai Ji and Lian Qiao, as if they would cry out as soon as he said that there was no cure. Xia Qing swallowed hard and said, "Actually, I have never seen this kind of poison before. Right now, it is made according to other detoxification prescriptions. I have to observe it for a few more days before I can diagnose it." "How long will it take?" Xiao Xiao asked. "Her life is not a trifling matter." 2 days, Xia Qing hurriedly said. "It only takes 2 days. After 2 days, if her poison is not under control, I don't think I can do anything, it'll be out of my hands." Xiao Xiao stared fixedly at Xia Qing for a long while, until Xia Qing felt a little uneasy, then nodded. "You only have 2 days. Xia Qing wiped off his sweat. He knew that his third senior brother had a cold personality, but he didn't expect it to be so scary when he really became angry. It really made people feel pressured. He simply found a reason to go out and study the prescription. After Xia Qing and Qi Feng left, Steward Lin came in and said, "Yesterday, Young Foreign ordered people to check on her food and everything. There is nothing wrong with our Wangfu." When Lian Xiao and Bai Ji heard this, Lian Xiao said anxiously, "I was afraid that Miss would be hungry, so this servant found some cakes from Bao Yuzhai for Miss, but there should be no problem with the cakes." Bai Ji also nodded repeatedly. "The cakes were taken out from a big bag. We set aside a few cakes for Miss and the rest were distributed to the maids in the courtyard. Everyone was fine after eating them, so there is no way the cakes were poisonous." It was really like looking for a needle in a haystack to investigate this matter seriously. Xiao Xiao waved his hand. Yi Feng understood what he meant, and immediately said, "This subordinate is going to Bao Yuzhai now." Such an accident happened on the very first day after their wedding, which was really not a good sign. Xiao Xiao looked at Zhang Ruan's slightly pale face, with an indecipherable expression. Lian Xiao nudged Bai Ji, and the two went out together. Xiao Xiao walked up to Zhang Ruan and sat down, and slowly stretched out his hand to push aside the stray hair from her ears, a trace of guilt flashing in his eyes. Right now, the most urgent task was to cure Zhang Ruan's poison. Xia Qing's words reminded him of that moment a few years ago when he had checked Zhang Ruan's pulse, and discovered that it was abnormal. It seemed like there had been something wrong with her body at the time, but his medical skills were inferior to Xia Qing's. He thought that now that the poison was gradually receding, As long as she took a little care in boosting and regulating her body, it would not be a problem. Who would have thought that this poison was actually like a venomous snake lying dormant in Zhang Ruan's body? And now someone had found a chance to trigger it. Although Qi Feng and Xia Qing said that Zhang Ruan's poisoning had nothing to do with Zhang Dan, after Zhang Dan talked to Zhang Ruan's abnormal reaction of fear must have something to do with Zhang Dan. He frowned slightly. Besides, according to what Xia Qing said, the poison had accumulated in Zhang Ruan's body for many years. That is to say, Zhang Ruan must have been poisoned when she was still a child and to have actually harmed a child. Who could have poisoned her? Oh. He had also heard that Zhang Ruan's life in the Jiangfu was not good in the early years, but he never thought that someone was planning to kill her when she was still a child. Thinking of this, Xiao Xiao's eyes were layered with a chilly gust of iciness. He stroked Zhang Ruan's hair, stood up and walked out of the room. Genie and the others were waiting outside with serious expressions. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes and said lightly, I want to know everything in detail that happened in the Jiangfu after Wang Fei was born. Genie's expression froze, and he said seriously yes. He took the order and left. In the blink of an eye, the day turned to night as Xiao Xiao sat in the room and browsed through batches of official documents, but his expression did not show any tiredness at all. Steward Lin came several times to persuade him to rest early, but Xiao Xiao only said that there was still work to do, and anyone with a discerning eye could see that it was just an excuse to guard Zhang Ruan. It's just that the master's mind could not be changed by the subordinates, and after a few fruitless attempts, they left him alone. Lu Zhu opened the door and came in, holding a medicine bowl in her hand. Seeing Xiao Xiao was still there, she said, Guy, the medicine that divine physician Xia prescribed for Miss is ready. This medicine was boiled by this servant and Tianzhu together. No one else has touched it. Since Zhang Ruan had been poisoned, the Wangfu was being exceptionally conscious about meals and medicines, as if afraid of being caught in others' traps once more. With each day that the culprit remained uncaught, everywhere around Zhang Ruan would always be precarious. Xiao Xiao looked up and said, You can leave, I'll feed her. Lu Zhu did not dare to say a word, turning around to put the medicine bowl on the desk, and then leaving the room. After her departure, Xiao Xiao picked up the medicine bowl and walked to the bedside, propped Zhang Ruan up to lean against him, blew on the dark brown medicine in the bowl, and slowly fed it into Zhang Ruan's mouth. He moved very gently, for fear of hurting Zhang Ruan unintentionally. If Xiao Xiao, who had always been indifferent to others, were seen by others to be so gentle and considerate, then their eyes would fall out of shock. Helplessly, as Zhang Ruan remained in a coma, the medicine flowed out from the corner of her mouth, wetting Xiao Xiao's chest and splashing onto the bed. He didn't realize it either, and just stretched out his hand to gently wipe off the medicine stains around Zhang Ruan's mouth. Feeding medicine like this was not working. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes and thought for a moment, then picked up the medicine bowl and took a sip, pinched Zhang Ruan's chin and lifted it slightly, before leaning down and pressing his lips to hers. He slowly fed her mouth to mouth. Zhang Ruan's face was stunning, and while there was always a subtle indifference under her gentle appearance, at this moment her lips were soft, with the bitter aroma of medicinal potion. If it was any other time, he would probably have had some thoughts about the wind, flower, snow and moon, i.e., romance. But now Xiao Xiao had no such distracting ideas because looking at Zhang Ruan only made him feel distressed. He slowly repeated the process of feeding the medicine. Finally, Xiao Xiao put down the empty bowl in his hand, and when he was about to help her to lie down, he suddenly felt someone grab the front of his robe. Startled, he lowered his head to look down. Staring right back at him was Zhang Ruan, giving him a wide-eyed look. You. There was a moment of embarrassment, followed by joyful surprise. Xiao Xiao clasped Zhang Ruan's shoulder and said, Are you awake? Though Zhang Ruan did not answer his words, her eyes were wide open, but they were not calm, instead carrying helplessness and panic. Xiao Xiao was startled. Such a gaze from her seemed alien, and she did not seem to realize that Xiao Xiao was in front of her because she tightly held onto Xiao Xiao's robe as she muttered something to herself. Xiao Xiao frowned, and as he leaned his ears closer to her lips, Zhang Ruan's words clearly reached his ears. What she was muttering was, Help me. Xiao Xiao was astounded because Zhang Ruan had tightened herself into a ball. And yet, she did not let go of him, as if holding on to the last straw, and repeated over and over again in a low voice, "Help me, help me." "Arwan," Xiao Xiao said softly, and patted her on the back lightly. "Don't be afraid, I'm Xiao Xiao." Zhang Ruan stared at him with wide eyes, but seemed to be looking at someone else through him. Xiao Xiao's outstretched hand stopped, and Zhang Ruan leaned back frantically. Her eyes were desperate and desolate, as if she saw something extremely terrifying, and she asked angrily, "Xianli, how dare you treat me like this?" Xiao Xiao stared closely at her eyes, feeling at a loss for the first time. He suddenly shouted, "Yi Feng!" Yi Feng suddenly pushed the door open and came in. "Master, what's the matter?" When he saw Zhang Ruan's appearance, Yi Feng was also quite shocked. When had Zhang Ruan ever cut such a sorry figure? It seemed as though she was not facing Xiao Xiao, but an old enemy with a blood feud. Before he could recover from the shock in front of him, he heard Xiao Xiao's indifferent voice, "Tell Xia Qing to get himself over here." Xia Qing rushed over quickly. In order to take care of Zhang Ruan's condition, he simply lived in the Jinying Wangfu. Being called upon in the middle of the night, Xia Qing had a vague premonition. When he entered the room, he saw Zhang Ruan's abnormal appearance and behavior, and was shocked. Xiao Xiao's face was so heavy as he asked, "Why did she become like this?" Xia Qing did not dare to be careless, and immediately stepped forward to feel Zhang Ruan's pulse. After doing so, he was stunned as if he could not believe it, and then checked carefully again. Then he looked at Xiao Xiao and stated, "Third brother Xiao, third sister-in-law's body is fine, but this behavior seems to be abnormal. I'm afraid she has some demons in her heart, and now she has been provoked by accident." Xia Qing was little embarrassed, as if he had unknowingly disclosed Zhang Ruan's secret, and with third sister-in-law's petty nature, he did not know how she would treat him after waking up. But even though he had some reservations about this, in the end she was still his sister-in-law. Xia Qing continued, "This is third sister-in-law's inner demon. I can only give a prescription to calm her down, but I really don't know if it will work or not. Third brother, I am a doctor who treats physical discomfort, but I can't treat people's inner heart disease, so don't make things difficult for me." This was true. Xiao Xiao knew that Xia Qing would not be able to come up with any good solutions if he continued to ask, so he said in a deep voice, "Leave." Xia Qing rubbed his head, and quickly retreated along with everyone else in the room. Only Yi Feng and Xiao Xiao were left in the room. Zhang Ruan huddled in a corner of the bed, her expression showing terror, and her eyes empty. Xiao Xiao was stunned again when he saw her gaze. How could anyone in the world have such a gaze? Over the years, the genie guard's subordinates had lost a lot of lives, and there were some who struggled and begged for mercy before they died, but they were not as tragic as the girl in front of him. There was no scheming and cunning in those upturned eyes, only the despair engraved in the marrow of the bone. It seemed that after being looked at by those eyes, one would feel that there was no light in the world anymore. Demons in her heart? Xiao Xiao remembered Xia Qing's words. Zhang Ruan had inner demons? His eyes were cold, looking at the girl in front of him. For a long time he had felt that Zhang Ruan had a secret that no one knew about. She often came up with some strange schemes, but they were never in vain. She was like a sudden glimmer of light in the great Jin dynasty, strange and mysterious. But he did not know what her presence foretold. And Xiao Xiao couldn't ignore what she had said just now. Xianli. Many of the things she did were somewhat closely related to Xianli. He also sent secret guards to investigate the relationship between Zhang Ruan and Xianli, but nothing was found. He had initially thought it was just a coincidence, but now it seemed that his guess was right. Zhang Ruan and Xianli must have some kind of conflict between them. Furthermore, after looking at it, it would not be a stretch to consider their relationship as a deeply rooted blood feud. Just what did Xianli do to her? For her to question this miserably. Yi Feng couldn't help but be terrified as he watched from the side. How Zhang Ruan usually portrayed herself made it seem as though she had no weakness. Even in the face of the most cunning enemy, she could remain calm. But now, after being poisoned, her inner demons were forced out, forcing her to show such an extremely fragile side. What had she been through? Xiao Xiao walked over gently, afraid of disturbing her. Zhang Ruan stared at him coldly. Xiao Xiao stretched out his hand, wanting to hold her in his arms to comfort her, but when he was about to step closer, Zhang Ruan grabbed his arm and bit down hard. Master! Yi Feng exclaimed, seeing Zhang Ruan's extremely deep bite and Xiao Xiao's light-colored clothes that he was wearing today immediately stained with blood. However, Xiao Xiao just frowned slightly, letting her bite as she wished. He then stretched out his other hand to gently touch her head, with a soft tone, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." He didn't move and Zhang Ruan did not let go, making Yi Feng anxious. He did not know how long it took, but when Zhang Ruan seemed to tire, she let go, and Xiao Xiao released his hand from her mouth. Yet he was not in a hurry to look at his injury. Instead, he reached out to help her wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth. Zhang Ruan stared at him blankly. Then her eyes turned red suddenly, and hot tears began to roll down the back of Xiao Xiao's hands. Could she have woken up? Xiao Xiao wasn't sure. Zhang Ruan covered her face suddenly, and it was as if her voice was caught between laughing and crying. Yi Feng didn't dare to let out a breath because in this silent night, her crying was extremely clear. She took her hands away, and there was a clear expression on her face, which seemed to be a hopeless smile, while at the same time seemed to be frighteningly filled with grief. She asked loudly, "Father, you have sent me to hell like this. Alongside them you lied to me, and used my life to be a stepping stone for Jiang Su. And from the beginning you wanted to use me as a tool for your official career. You are so cruel." Wasn't Jiang Su dead? Why did young Furen suddenly mention her again? Yi Feng inwardly wondered. And what about Jiang Quan's achievements and official career? Yi Feng could hardly make heads nor tails out of Zhang Ruan's words. Zhang Ruan shook her head and said, "I am not a demoness who will bring disaster to the country. I did not kill the emperor." "Listen, Ruan, don't think about it." Xiao Xiao pressed her firmly into his arms. No emotion could be seen in his dark eyes, but his tone was full of gentleness and comfort. Zhang Ruan grabbed his sleeve and said suddenly, "You save my Dage, you save him, they want to kill him, you have to save my Dage." Xiao Xiao closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were as cold as ice. He ordered coldly, "Yi Feng, go to the Jiangfu right away and invite Zhang Xinji over here." He thought that Zhang Xinji knew at least a little about some of these things, but now it seemed that these two siblings did not share everything with one another. Zhang Ruan had always sealed herself in a small space that no one could enter because of the deep secret she guarded. How could she be poisoned? Zhang Xinji grabbed Xiao Xiao's lapel, but perhaps because he was afraid of hurting Zhang Ruan, he only used a little bit of strength. He lowered his voice, but his eyes were a little red, and his tone was full of anger. "Xiao Xiao, you let her be poisoned in the Wangfu right under your nose after only 1 day of marriage? This is how you take care of her. If I had known that this place was such a den, I would have kept her in the Jiangfu for the rest of my life and would never have allowed her to marry you." Zhang Xinji had always been protective of those closest to him, unflinching even if they were in the wrong, but Yi Feng, who was listening, spoke up against this unjustified attitude towards his master, saying, "Young Master Zhang, what you said is inappropriate. Young Furen was not poisoned in our Jinying Wangfu. It has been investigated, she was exposed to the poison in the womb, and it has accumulated in her body since then. Therefore, the source is not the Wangfu. You want to blame Master, but aren't you acting too unreasonable?" The genie guards treated Xiao Xiao with complete reverence, but they didn't pay much attention when speaking to others, and so Yi Feng was not polite when he spoke. Zhang Xinji was stunned when he heard this and replied, "Was she really poisoned in the womb? That's what I want to ask you." Xiao Xiao looked at him coldly. Someone who felt at a disadvantage by her presence in the Jiangfu harmed her. "Who is it?" Zhang Xinji was slightly startled and then sneered. He had always been kind and polite to others, and he rarely showed such a gloomy expression. He stated, "Ruan and I are thorns in everyone's eyes in the Jiangfu. If you want to ask me who is not good to us, that would be too easy to tell. Ruan has been mistreated by others since birth. Back then there was Mother and I who tried our best to protect her well, and at the very least she lived in peace. If you didn't mention it today, I would have been kept in the dark about her being poisoned." Zhang Xinji clenched his fists. "If I knew who that person was, I would shred them into pieces." "My mother was also poisoned," Xiao Xiao said. "It's because of this that she passed away. Yet you don't seem to have been harmed. Xiao Xiao glanced at Zhang Ruan in his arms. Only you know the people of Jiangfu best. You need to find the person who poisoned her. After finding that person, there is no need for you to step in. I will let them live a life worse than death. He spoke in a calm and flat tone, yet the temperature in the room abruptly dropped, and his last few words were delivered with a faint killing aura, earth-shatteringly intent on engulfing all in sight. One would not think that such a beautiful and elegant young man could turn into a bloodthirsty and ruthless person in a moment. Zhang Exionji looked at him steadfastly, and Xiao Xiao calmly returned the look. After a while, Zhang Exionji said in a deep voice, "If you ask me who our biggest enemy is, it must be Xia Yan's family. From the beginning, she wanted to be the mistress of the Jiangfu when she was clearly just a concubine. She always made trouble for my mother, but she still pretended to be generous, and Jiang Quan always protected her." Zhang Exionji's expression seemed like he had swallowed a fly. Whenever he recalled those days, and the humiliation that Xia Yan brought to the three of them, a mother and her two children, it made him feel sick from the bottom of his heart. Now he was not even willing to call Jiang Quan father, and it could be seen that he had no affection for the Jiangfu. Xia Yan is already dead, so she can't be the one to stimulate the old poison in Zhang Ruan's body, Xiao Xiao said. I will investigate this matter thoroughly. Now. He looked at Zhang Ruan in his arms. You watch over her. He let go of her hand. Zhang Ruan had calmed down a little after being coaxed by him, and there was no longer any hysterical questioning, but she still looked terrified and quite miserable, as if she had experienced some extreme despair. As soon as Xiao Xiao got out of the way, Zhang Exionji stepped forward and hugged Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan's eyes were already red and swollen. Although Zhang Exionji had answered Xiao Xiao's question before, he was still full of doubts when he saw this scene, so he hurriedly asked, "How did our Wan become like this?" By some stroke of unprecedented misfortune, the poison stimulated in her body awoke her inner demons. From Xiao Xiao's words one could not hear any emotion, but a person could feel the slight distress contained in those calm words. He stood up and glanced at Zhang Ruan. These are her inner demons. Zhang Exionji, she is immersed in such fear every day. I can't understand it and you don't understand it, but there are some things that I think you should know. He lowered his eyes, his long eyelashes seemed to tremble slightly, and his tone was calm like waves. Your Mimi Hongenjunju is not as fearless as she appears on the surface. She is always afraid. It's just that you and I didn't know. After saying this, he opened the door and walked out, leaving Zhang Exionji rooted to his spot. After being stunned, Zhang Exionji seemed to understand, and he lowered his head to look at Zhang Ruan. She didn't respond to his presence even though Zhang Exionji was by her side, and her eyes seemed to be looking at someone else through him. He noticed her little fingers were clenched tightly and his eyes turned red immediately. Zhang Ruan was very timid when she was young, but whenever she was extremely scared, she would always do this little action unconsciously. However, later when Zhang Ruan came back from the rural residence, she was smart, calm, agile and bold. She seemed to have nothing to fear, and he never saw her make such an action again. He thought it was because she no longer had anything to be afraid of, and she no longer kept this habit, but when he saw her today, it turned out that she was still the same little girl as before. How did he let his Mimi fall into such a situation? What Xiao Xiao said hit his heart like a heavy hammer. Zhang Ruan was immersed in fear day and night, but he didn't know? He didn't even know what she was afraid of? Zhang Exionji gritted his teeth and punched the headboard of the bed fiercely. The vase on the headboard shattered, and blood slowly overflowed from between his fingers. Zhang Ruan trembled, and when Zhang Exionji looked at her, she grabbed Zhang Exionji's hand and murmured, bleeding. Dage is bleeding, Dage is dead. Dage died in battle, Dage didn't die in battle, he was murdered. Dage. Her originally stable mood was suddenly agitated, and her eyes were filled with madness, but every word she said was about Zhang Exionji. Although Zhang Exionji didn't understand what she said, his nose turned sour when he heard it, and he couldn't help but hug Zhang Ruan into his arms, like how he used to comfort his Mimi many years ago, and softly coaxed, Ruan, Dage is fine, Dage will not abandon you, don't be afraid. I'm not going anywhere. In the tranquility of the night, The movements of this brother and sister could not be ignored even if they wanted to, and their words were clearly heard by everyone outside the door. Lu Zhu covered her mouth, her eyes filled with tears, and whispered, "I never knew that Miss Hart was filled with such bitterness and grief." Ever since she followed Zhang Ruan to the rural residence, Zhang Ruan had never shown her aggrieved side. She had her own thoughts, but amongst all of the emotions she had shown, the only exception was fragility and vulnerability. Jean Eyre patted her shoulder. "Young foreign has a resolute heart, and she will definitely get better." Tianzhu remained motionless, just looking at the room quietly. She once admired the tenacity and means of the young woman in that room, and wanted to work hard to become as strong as her. Seeing Zhang Ruan's current appearance now, Tianzhu was also confused. "She must have suffered a lot," Steward Lin said suddenly. It was rare for everyone to see him so serious, and in a flurry they all turned their heads to look at him. Steward Lin stood outside the room, his shrewd eyes seeming to contain some strange emotions, and he looked exhausted and sorrowful for a moment. He said, "Young foreign's resolute mind is different from ordinary people, and it is not some extraordinary talent that is innate. But whatever she endured in her childhood cannot be endured by ordinary people. For her methods to be this skillful, to be so unafraid of everything, it must be because a long time ago, she must have been at the brink of utter despair as she watched innocent people being harmed by others." Was she really so badly hurt by someone? Everyone looked at the pair of silhouettes under the lights in the room again. The woman seemed extremely sad. Under the shadow of the shaking lights, her shoulders appeared surprisingly weak, which was really unbearable to look at. At first these people thought she was strong and indifferent, but to think that her heart was dealt with such pain. All at once, towards this young foreign of the Wangfu, everyone felt an added layer of lamentation to the sorrow that they already felt for her. Where did Master go? Jin-san looked around. Xiao Xiao had disappeared after leaving the room. Jin-si was stunned. Master wouldn't go directly to Jiangdan, right? Everyone looked at each other in blank dismay. As the end of the year approached, everyone was beginning to buy things in preparation for the new year, and even the palace was very lively. Additionally, the weather had been very good over the past few days. Even if there was some light snow, the presence of the sun was always lovely. The emperor was happy, all the concubines in the palace were happy, and since the master was happy, the servants below were of course the same. All of the previous depression was swept away in the palace, and it had become cheerful and lively. In a corner of the palace, Mingyu was serving breakfast because Xian Pei had just woken up. The young man was valued by the emperor now, so much so that even Xian Li and Xian Hua did not appear to have much strength nor favor in front of him. Although the courtiers still felt that it was risky to hedge their bets on a prince who had no background, judging by the emperor's attitude towards this prince, they were left a little uncertain about which sails to favor. 13th Prince Xian Pei was familiar with the 4 books and 5 classics, and wrote policy advice well. Even Lu Min, the always strict imperial grand tutor, was full of praise for him. He was neither arrogant after receiving favor nor did he rely on it, and even though he was still young, he had a lot of opinions on the affairs of the court. Every time the emperor used the official affairs of the court to test him, Xian Pei could come up with several good ideas. The sky had just turned bright. Xian Pei ordered someone to light the lamps before casually taking a few bites of breakfast, and then after washing up, he walked to his desk, on which there was a thick stack of records. He was always like this, getting up when the cock crowed. Everyone only saw his achievements, but they didn't see the hard work he put in behind closed doors. He never talked about this to anyone, but Mingyu was secretly amazed, and the longer she stayed by Xian Pei's side, the more she felt that this delicate and beautiful young man was really incredible. At such a young age, he knew how to hide his strength and bide his time. His self-control was so amazing that he hardly needed to be reminded by others. He always knew exactly what he wanted to do and worked hard for it. Even the emperor's favor for him was within Xian Pei's step-by-step plan. For example, at this moment, his painstaking effort to study was to enable him to answer fluently before the emperor asked a new question. Xian Pei was at his desk, and Mingyu got up to clean up the leftover dishes. While she was still in the middle of clearing, she heard the panicked voice of Chao Yang, another maidservant of Xian Pei's, from outside. Xiao Wangya, why are you here? Your Highness is still resting you. Before the words finished, there was a loud bang as the door was pushed open, and there the young man in black stood, his eyes cold, but his expression was faintly haggard. Chao Yang rushed in, looking at Xian Pei with some fear. Your Highness, this servant couldn't stop. Although Xian Pei always seemed to be very easygoing, he never seemed to say a harsh word to his servant. Once he was angered, the aftermath would always make one's blood run cold. Therefore, even though Chao Yang knew her master was always beaming and sunny, she treated this master with all her heart and soul. Chao Yang's words reminded Mingyu that she had been originally arranged by Xiao Xiao to remain next to Xian Pei, but Xiao Xiao was ultimately her master. On a normal day, she was given various tasks to do by Xian Pei without any trouble. However, at this moment, she definitely had no intention of stopping Xiao Xiao's. Fortunately, Xian Pei was not angry at all. He just glanced at Xiao Xiao and said to Mingyu and Chao Yang, "This prince wants to read books, both of you withdraw." The underlying meaning behind these words was to conceal Xiao Xiao's presence, so Mingyu and Chao Yang quickly stepped back and closed the door. After the two left, Xian Pei walked to the table and sat down unhurriedly. Today he was wearing a court robe with pine green brocade and gold trim. Now that the emperor was treating him well, the clothes were no longer shabby or ill-fitting. With his silhouette finely adorned, his clothes were very suitable for Xian Pei's temperament. He was born with a delicate and elegant appearance, but now he was filled with the air of nobility, and had a special aura that oscillated between a soft and tender youth and a mature man. He leaned back in his chair. His voice was still immature and clear, but his tone was filled with panache similar to adults. For Xiao Wangya to have broken into my palace early in the morning, you may as well speak directly if you have something to say. As he spoke, he picked up his pen, as if wanting to practice calligraphy. What's your relationship with Zhang Ruan? Xiao Xiao asked coldly. Xian Pei paused, and a large drop of ink dripped from the writing brush and condensed on the paper. He put down his brush, concealed the deep meaning in his eyes, and then slowly said, "Oh? Why does Xiao Wangya ask that?" Answer my question first. Xiao Xiao stared at him without giving in. Xian Pei turned to look at him, and his gaze slowly fell on Xiao Xiao's arm. Zhang Ruan had bitten him last night, and Steward Lin had bandaged him up. The wound on his arm was covered, but the scratches as a result of Zhang Ruan's muddled state were left on the back of his hand. Xian Pei saw the scratches clearly, and immediately stood up. His expression changed. What did you do to her? Xiao Xiao was cold and arrogant, and besides Zhang Ruan there was almost no other woman who could get close to him, but now he was married and Zhang Ruan was also the one who had the closest relationship with him. The scratches of a woman's fingernails appeared on the back of his fine hand. It was really hard not to think of how it might have happened. It's not that Xiao Xiao had never met Xian Pei, and he also knew that this young boy was also a master at disguising his emotions, but now his emotions were so clearly exposed, which was truly an eye-opener. Fortunately, his attitude towards Xiao Xiao was so clear that it could be seen that he cared about Zhang Ruan. At least this would never be disadvantageous to Zhang Ruan. Seeing Xiao Xiao remain silent and not speaking, Xian Pei felt anxious, so he stepped forward a few steps and said, "Quickly answer me. What did you do to her?" Hearing this, Xiao Xiao looked at him thoughtfully. Xian Pei was stared at by those deep eyes that were as black as ink, and suddenly realized his blunder. However, it was too late. Xiao Xiao asked lightly, "Why do you care so much?" Xian Pei was at a loss for words for a moment, and then seemed to think of something and immediately said, "Hong'an Junju is now at least half the elder sister of this prince. Since we are siblings, we should take care of each other. If you bully her, you would be humiliating the face of the royal family. This prince is not afraid to tell you clearly today that if you dare harm even a slightest strand of her hair, even though this prince is small and weak, even if I have to risk my life, I will seek justice for her." Although this young man never expressed his emotions nor anger on his face, he became extremely persistent when speaking about Zhang Ruan's affairs. When push came to shove, even if his words were a little bit childish, one could still see his determination. Those words were not fake but sincere. If Xiao Xiao really bullied Zhang Ruan one day, Xian Pei would really desperately find justice for her. Such a relationship was really unusual. After all, Zhang Ruan was only a princess in name, and had never been in contact with Xian Pei for any length of time. What's more, he had also investigated. The interactions between Zhang Ruan and Xian Pei started when she helped Xian Pei out of the conflict with Princess He. It was just a trivial thing, so how could such a deep friendship have fostered from that? But since then, Xian Pei had even testified for Zhang Ruan in the throne room at the imperial trial. Moreover, Xian Pei played a part in the crown prince throwing his hand in to assist in the matter, and also in inviting Xiaqing to the capital. In addition, Xian Pei's congratulatory gift on the day of marriage was so generous that it went over and beyond the very rich dowry of ordinary official daughters. No matter how you looked at it, they were not just nodding acquaintances, and Xian Pei's expression just now confirmed Xiao Xiao's conjecture. Even so, there were still many nonsensical things, and even though it was clear that the two of them had not had much contact last night, Zhang Ruan. He lowered his head and looked down at Xian Pei. The boy's stature was still small, and his delicate appearance complemented him very cutely, but there was deep hostility in his eyes. Xiao Xiao said lightly, "I didn't do anything, she was poisoned." Poisoned? Xian Pei was taken aback and hurriedly asked, "Then how is she doing now? Is she still okay?" "Not good." A hint of deep meaning flashed in Xiao Xiao's eyes as he continued. "She is deeply immersed in the chaos and conflicts stirred from the inner demons of her own world, muttering to herself, and can't hear the words of others at all. What should I do?" Xian Pei lost his usual precocious composure, and asked, "Aren't you Jinying Wang? Why didn't you invite the imperial physician? By the way, isn't Jinling Divine Physician still in the capital? Why don't you invite him? This prince can immediately send someone to invite him with an invitation." "No need," Xiao Xiao interrupted his movements, and his voice became cold for a moment. "He is at the Wangfu. It's just that our Wan mentioned a name while muttering to herself, and this prince thought it sounded familiar." Xian Pei was stunned. Xiao Xiao said slowly, she said, "Pair." Chapter 190. Chapter 190. Seeking a Cure. Xian Pei's expression suddenly changed, and he took a few steps back in shock. It was as if the earth and sky had turned completely upside down, as his expression slowly changed from joy to sorrow. As Xiao Xiao closely took in his changing expressions, he began to frown. Eventually Xian Pei recovered from his tangled emotions. He looked at Xiao Xiao, and Xiao Xiao suddenly felt as though he was looking at an illusion, as if standing before him was not an immature young man, but rather an old man who had been through innumerable ups and downs in his life. The corners of Xian Pei's curved lips seemed to show that he had finally taken control of his emotions, but at the same time there was a tinge of bitterness. He looked at Xiao Xiao and said slowly, "I want to see her." Xiao Xiao replied in a low voice, "Okay." "Ming Yu Chao Yang." Xian Pei suddenly called out, and the two maids guarding the door rushed in. Xian Pei restrained his emotions, and his tone became extremely icy in an instant. "I'm going out of the palace. Before I return, do everything possible to keep this matter secret." "Your Highness, you shouldn't." Upon hearing this, Chao Yang cautioned anxiously. "It's a big crime to privately leave the palace without permission. If His Majesty asks for you at present, there are so many people in the palace watching you. Your Highness, you must not give them a handle to use against you." "Am I the master or are you the master?" Xian Pei asked back. "If you can't even handle this matter well, you need not stay by my side." There was no room for negotiation. Chao Yang suddenly remembered that the young man in front of her remained indifferent even when he watched the maid who had been with him for more than 10 years die by flogging in front of his eyes. He was not an ordinary young man. At this moment his tone was so chillingly cold that Chao Yang shivered. Frightened by such cruel eyes, she couldn't speak anymore. Xiao Xiao watched coldly from the side, and without saying a word, he calmly signaled Mingyu with a look. When Mingyu saw this, she said to Xian Pei, "Don't worry, Your Highness, this maidservant will settle everything in the palace well." After all, it was Xiao Xiao who was instigating Xian Pei's departure from the palace, therefore, Xiao Xiao would not stand by without lifting a finger to help. Furthermore, Xian Pei and Zhang Ruan seemed to have a very close relationship, which meant that he would not let anything untoward befall Xian Pei. His own maid was following someone else's orders. Xianpei grimly smiled, and simply grabbed his cloak before saying, "Let's go." In the Jining Wangfu, Xiaqing had just checked Zhang Ruan's pulse. After drinking the medicine, she had finally calmed down early in the morning and had fallen into a deep sleep. It's just that all the people in the Wangfu had no intention of having a good rest themselves, and thus had dark circles under their eyes. As a doctor, Xiaqing had racked his brains to find a way to detoxify the poison in Zhang Ruan, but after a whole night of research, he felt powerless, not to mention Zhang Xing, who had stayed with Zhang Ruan throughout the night. Although unaware of what he had heard from Zhang Ruan mutterings, when everyone saw his face in the morning, he was looking absolutely desolate, as if he had aged 10 years overnight. Qi Feng was sitting at the entrance of the courtyard, and Guanliang Han and Emotsong were beside him. Guanliang Han said, "This girl from the Zhang family is usually so lively and vivacious, and her foresight and acts of subterfuge are a league above most people, so how could she have fallen prey to someone's machinations? Back then she was a little girl. How could anyone be so cruel as to poison such a little girl?" Being born into a military family, Guanliang Han's nature was open and straightforward. Thus, to him such backyard dirty tricks were extremely disgusting. Emotsong always viewed Zhang Ruan as someone difficult to handle, but now he too felt quite uncomfortable and said, "Although I used to think that third sister-in-law was too competent and intense for a woman, I would rather have her be as arrogant as before than having her lie pathetically on the bed now." He looked at Qi Feng to one side and asked fourth brother Qi, "Why do you look so preoccupied?" Qi Feng came back to his senses and smiled wryly. "I'm fine." Seeing this, Emotsong patted him on the shoulder comfortingly. "I know. With your intelligence, for you to not be able to figure out how and through what scheme led to third sister-in-law's poisoning, you must definitely be blaming yourself. But it's not your fault. Maybe fifth brother Xiao will be able to make the antidote today, so don't be sad." Qi Feng smiled and said nothing. Emotsong didn't know what he was thinking as he looked at Zhang Ruan lying on the bed with a pale face. Listening to her distressing and heart-terrifying rambles, Qi Feng felt shocked once again. Previously, he had never liked women weeping or wailing, and he admired Zhang Ruan because of her courage. However, when he accidentally heard her grief-filled questioning last night, he felt an indescribable pain in his heart. He wanted to comfort her, but he could only watch from a distance. He hated himself for being useless and powerless, for being unable to be of any help in this situation. Everyone was preoccupied with their own thoughts, consequently not immediately realizing that Steward Lin had led Xiao Xiao back to the courtyard in a hurry. Moreover, there was another person behind him. Everyone felt this was a little strange. At this juncture, Xiao Xiao was still bringing another person into the Wangfu. Wasn't he afraid of making matters even more chaotic? When they looked closely at the person trailing behind Xiao Xiao, they saw that he was attired magnificently in brocade robes and was not too tall. And as he drew closer, he revealed a delicate and beautiful face, as if he was a young master of some noble family. Everyone felt he looked familiar. 13th Prince, Emotsong called out first. He looked at Xiao Xiao, then at Xianpei and asked third brother Xiao, "Why did you invite 13th Prince?" Emotsong was usually bold and unrestrained, but his first thought had nothing to do with the trouble that Xianpei would cause because he had privately left the palace without permission. Rather, he felt baffled as to why Xianpei had been invited over at this juncture whilst Zhang Ruan was in this predicament. He couldn't remember if Xianpei and Xiao Xiao shared a friendship, and as for Zhang Ruan, it was even more impossible to have any sort of relationship with Xianpei. "You can head in," Xiao Xiao said to Xianpei. "She's inside." Xianpei glanced at him and said, "Thank you." His expression was full of complex emotions, and the people around were puzzled by his expression. At that moment, they felt that this did not seem to be a conversation between a grown man and a young prince, but a man-to-man conversation of two individuals of equal status, and a promise between men. After Xianpei entered, Guanliang Han finally couldn't help but say, "Lao San, what the hell are you doing? Why did you invite 13th Prince over here? If the Emperor finds out about this, you will be adding another layer of trouble." "He had to come," Xiao Xiao said lightly. "There are some things that only he understands, and that only he knows what's going on." After Baiji and Lian Xiao left the room, Xianpei closed the door. He seemed a little afraid to approach the bed, and stopped a few steps away. Zhang Ruan slept peacefully and quietly. Her face was a little pale. Xianpei looked at her, before he finally took a few steps forward until he was at her bedside. Suddenly he knelt down with a plunk. The boy's back was straight like a truly proud nobleman, yet his eyes were filled with tears, but ultimately as more came, he could no longer hold them back. Hot tears dripped onto the back of Zhang Ruan's hand. He, Xiaqing, glanced at Xiao Xiao and met with his frigid gaze replied in bewilderment, I am under the tutelage of teacher Ba Qi, the most intelligent person in the world. I can't find a cure for this poison, but Shifu may be able to solve it. If Shifu can't solve it, then no one in the world can. He looked at Xiao Xiao, third brother, why don't you take third sister-in-law to Njianan? Shifu should be out of seclusion now. Shifu, master/teacher. Xiao Xiao was startled, and suddenly remembered the last time he went to Mtjianan to see teacher Ba Qi. Back then teacher Ba Qi had asked him if there was any special person around him. At that time he didn't understand whom teacher Ba Qi was referring to, and he couldn't grasp a single word he said. At that time teacher Ba Qi said that this person came with vengeance and also to pay a debt of gratitude, and that his fate was entangled with this person. Thinking about this incident, could this person be Zhang Ruan? That's right, teacher Ba Qi also said that he would have a chance meeting with this person. Isn't it now? Seeing Xiao Xiao's eyes flickering, Zhang Xinji was unsure about what he was thinking of to be so lost in thought, so he patted Xiao Xie on the shoulder and said, Xiao Wangye. Xiao Xiao came back to his senses, glanced at Xiaqing and said, I'll leave first thing in the morning. I'm going too. As soon as the words fell, Xianpei stood out. Seeing that everyone was looking at him strangely, Xianpei was startled, and tried to cover up his misstep by saying, this prince and Hong and Junju can also be considered as siblings. Now that Hong and Junju is suffering misfortune, this prince can't just stand by and watch with folded arms. In any case, this is a matter involving a royal family member, hence this prince is qualified to take care of it. She was just a Junju who was adopted halfway, and had no blood relationship with him at all. What kind of sibling was this? The eyes of the crowd clearly showed their disbelief. Xiao Xiao replied coldly, no. Xianpei still wanted to speak, but he heard Xiao Xiao's calm and emotional words. You have been out of the palace for a long time. The servants can't hide your absence anymore, and if word gets out it will implicate her. Xianpei fell silent when he heard that Zhang Ruan would be affected. He clenched his fists and said after a while, okay, I'll go back to the palace, but if there is any news you must send me a message. Xiao Xiao didn't promise him but nor did he refuse him, meaning he had tacitly agreed. Seeing this, Zhang Xinji said, then I will follow. I don't have to stay in the palace, and I am Ruan's elder brother after all, so I can't feel rest assured if I'm not with her. There is an 8-ring formation on Mtjianan. You are not a disciple of this sect, so you cannot break through. Xiao Xiao said lightly, if you go, it will only delay time. Zhang Xinji was at a loss for words. Qifeng smiled and said, fifth brother Xia and I will go with third brother Xiao. Fifth brother Xia knows medical skills so he may be able to help Shifu. I also have some things I want to ask Shifu. Second brother Guan and seventh brother Mo should stay in the capital so that if there are any unusual changes, at least they will be able to deal with them. He said, we will find a way to have third sister-in-law see Shifu as soon as possible. Xiao Xiao glanced at Qifeng, but did not refute his words. He turned around and walked into the house. Let's do as he says. Mtjianan was covered with snow all year round. The mountains were high and its valleys were deep. One could see the scenery of the northern country all year round, with broken ice protruding and flowing water gurgling. From the foot of the mountain to the top, there were 8 plum blossom formations in total, which were intricately interlocked with each other, truly a matchless exquisite work of art. The scenery at Luyang Villa, which sat at the top of the mountain, was different from that at the foot. Even though it was deep into the winter, there were still colorful flowers blooming, and it was warm like early spring. The green parrot at the gate of the villa flapped its wings and screamed. An old man in gray clothes was sitting in the yard looking at the chessboard on a stone table in deep thought. The match had become a convoluted mess, and there were no more possible moves to be made. The green parrot chirped cheerfully as the old man shook his head. Then he remarked, Linglong, "Our guests have arrived." As soon as the words fell, an urgent voice came from the gate of the villa Shifu. Xiaqing was gasping for breath as he rushed in. Being constantly on the move without a break for more than 10 days had made it a bit difficult for him. Xiao Xiao had been the leader of the genie guards for a long time, so such a short journey was not a problem for him. And though Qifeng had struggled a bit, at least he had some basic martial arts skills. However, he was still a scholar who could barely truss a chicken. So in the end, although Xiaqing was knowledgeable in the art of Qi Huang, he did not know how to strengthen his own core. Nevertheless, Xiaqing was an excellent physician. He adhered to and upheld the medical practitioner's code of ethics and practice, so he gritted his teeth along the way and did not complain once about being tired. Teacher Bachi smiled slightly. Little 5. Xiao Xiao and Qifeng appeared behind Xiaqing. Xiao Xiao was holding Zhang Ruan in his arms. When Qifeng saw Teacher Bachi, he greeted and said, "Third sister-in-law has been poisoned. Shifu, please save her." Teacher Bachi's eyes fell on Xiao Xiao, who was behind him, but he did not linger on him but for a moment before his gaze stopped at Zhang Ruan nestled in his arms. With a soft sigh he declared, "The time for our fated meeting has finally arrived." Xiaqing rubbed his head. "Shifu, what are you talking about? I really can't detoxify the poison inside third sister-in-law. Shifu, check and see if there are any other alternatives. Her life is at risk. Third sister-in-law hasn't woken up in many days, and your student thinks that this is not a good sign. Carry her to my room," Teacher Bachi ordered. After Zhang Ruan was carefully laid on the bed in the room, Teacher Bachi suddenly said, "Little 4, little 5, you go out. Xiao and I have something to discuss. Shifu, if you have something to say, we can talk about it another day. Right now, shouldn't we worry about saving third sister-in-law first?" Qifeng replied urgently. He had always been calm and wise, rarely so anxious. Now, seeing that Zhang Ruan's health was getting worse by the day, he had completely lost his composure. Xiaqing pulled him along. "What nonsense are you talking about? Shifu is here, third sister-in-law is definitely no longer in any danger. Let's go." Qifeng was stunned for a moment. After all, although Teacher Bachi was usually gentle and tolerant towards his disciples, nevertheless it was ingrained in their bones the proper etiquettes and propriety between a master and his disciples. Just now, he had indeed spoken out of turn, thus he was immediately contrite. He said, "Pardon me, your disciple was overly anxious." Then, after casting a perturbed gaze towards Zhang Ruan, he and Xiaqing withdrew together. After Xiaqing and Qifeng left, Teacher Bachi looked down at Zhang Ruan on the bed. He took out a cloth bag, but he was not in a hurry to open it. Instead he asked, "Xiao, do you understand now?" After a moment of silence, Xiao Xiao said, "Shifu, please guide me." "Xiao, you are so smart, but why do you still not understand?" Teacher Bachi didn't look at him but continued, "The words that Shifu spoke to you at the beginning, you should understand a little bit now. Do you still want to make this decision?" "Shifu thinks I shouldn't make such a decision?" Xiao Xiao asked back. "As your Shifu, I will always support your decision." Teacher Bachi sighed. "It will be as you have spoken." "Okay," Xiao Xiao said, "then I beg Shifu to save my wife." Teacher Bachi folded his hands and said flatly, "Xiao, I remember telling you that you are not suitable to be a killer." "Shifu said my blood is not cold enough," Xiao Xiao replied. "That's right. Xiao, as a teacher, I knew early on that you would definitely make this decision. But Xiao, you have to understand," Teacher Bachi said with a hint of compassion on his face, "your mortal relationship should have ended here. However, with the decision that you've made today, your fate can never be reversed. With the fall of the Ziwei Emperor star, your fate to be a monarch will fail even though success is in sight." That said, he abruptly changed the subject. "In this life, you will no longer have the fate of a lonely star. Ziwei, lit. the Emperor Star or the Purple Star, associated with the Earth, the leader, organizer, the senior, the monarch, stable development, benevolence, neutrality, wisdom, obligations, human society, power, position, material wealth, the capacity of healing and rescuing. Gongbei, to fail within sight of success, last-minute failure / to fall at the last hurdle / snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Gushesheiming. It refers to the fate of a person who is doomed to be alone all his life. Although the lone star of Tiansha is a great ominous sign, the ominous star does not affect the person himself, but presents a very evil trend to the people around him. I understand, Shifu. I beg Shifu to save my wife. Xiao Xiao's expression was unmoved, and his tone was calm. If you go against heaven's will to change your fate, something bad will happen to you. Your life may suddenly suffer a catastrophe. Even so, Xiao won't regret it? Teacher Ba Qi warned. There is nothing in this world that is particularly worth cherishing for me, Xiao Xiao said lightly. I want to protect her. I will never regret the decision I make today, regardless of fate or disaster. The young man's appearance was peerless, his eyes were indifferent, his tone seemed to be as calm as usual, and he couldn't even see a trace of affection. However, the determination and commitment he showed could move even the hardest-hearted person at the time. Teacher Ba Qi was slightly taken aback, and his eyes were a little dazed, as if he saw someone else through Xiao Xiao. Many years ago, he also met someone who spoke these words in the same tone as Xiao Xiao was using today, saying that he would never regret, but... Teacher Ba Qi sighed. Each person had his own fated relationship. He said, okay, I will save her. Her poison is not difficult to cure. It was made from a poisonous plant found in South Xinjiang, and it has a hallucinatory effect on people. If there is a knot in one's heart or an inner demon, as long as they feel a little unhappy on a daily basis, they will endure the torture in their heart every day, and they will see the scene they fear most in their life every day. While this poison is harmless to the human body, it will torture a person's heart. Finally, it will cause the person to die of heart failure after being tortured to death by their own inner demons. Xiao Xiao was taken aback for a moment, then frowned. It's actually South Xinjiang. Her inner demons are too strong. Teacher Ba Qi said meaningfully, in fact, she is in the most vulnerable state now, and the answer you want to know can be obtained from her at this moment. If you want to know the secret... No need, Shifu. Xiao Xiao interrupted him. Even if I want to know her secret, she must tell me in person. I will never take advantage of her when she is not in a conscious state. She is unlikely to ever tell you herself, Teacher Ba Qi asked. If she refuses to tell you this secret for the rest of her life, what will you do? I will accompany her to guard this secret for the rest of my life, Xiao Xiao replied. Teacher Ba Qi was stunned, and suddenly said seriously, Xiao, I have always thought that you would not be the #1 killer in the world, but now I feel that your inner demons are no less than hers. The demons in her heart are linked to her secret, but the demon in your heart is her. Once a heartless person finds love, he would be more strongly attached and committed than anyone else in the world. Since Xiao Xiao was behaving as such, this made Teacher Ba Qi feel that the affairs of life were impermanent. Otherwise, why were the things that happened many years ago repeating once again? He thought he had seen through heaven's will, but fate was always unpredictable. Otherwise, why would he not leave Mt Jianan for the rest of his life? Because he would be punished if he revealed too many secrets. In this world, many things can be predicted and foreseen, with the exception of one thing: love. If she is indeed my heart's demon, then I would rather endure for my whole life than allow the shackles to break, Xiao Xiao said. Chapter 191. Chapter 191. The Cause and Effect of the Past Life. It felt as though her head was hurting. Zhang Ruan's whole body seemed to be as light as a feather without a trace of strength. She struggled to open her eyes, but did not see the bright sky. Instead, a strangely familiar, damp and somewhat sweet unctuous smell filled her nose. She forced herself to recall what it was and was stunned to realize that it was the scent of blood. She moved her body and slowly got up from the ground. It was a dark and damp place and there were black worms crawling all over the ground. They were rotten and disgusting. A thought seemed to flash across her mind, but it was gone too fast for her to grasp hold of it. She touched what she thought was a hard object beside her, but it seemed to be covered in some sort of thick and sticky liquid. Then as she tried hard to raise her head, she suddenly heard a squeak, followed by a voice. Suddenly, an intense ray of sunlight came in and dazzled her eyes so much that she could hardly open them. A woman's voice rang out, "Hurry up, the Empress wants to see it with her own eyes. Move faster. Must not let the Empress wait for you little wenches." Immediately, a few maids walked in, but from their expressions, one didn't know whether they were afraid or disgusted. Oddly, they lit the oil lamps in their hands as they walked in, until they stopped at Zhang Ruan's side. However, they seemed to be oblivious to her, and instead proceeded to pick up something from the ground. Zhang Ruan frowned slowly, looking at them warily. Those people didn't seem to notice her at all, as if she didn't exist. Zhang Ruan stood up tentatively, but no one stopped her. After some consideration, she lowered her head and followed the maids out. As soon as she stepped out of the room, she was bathed in dazzling sunlight. It seemed as though she hadn't seen such sunlight for a long time. Turning around, her gaze directly landed on the object carried by one of the palace maids, and she was so startled that she instinctively took 2 steps back, and almost fell down. The maid was holding a wooden basin in her hands, and a monster-like thing was lying on its back in it. All 4 limbs were missing from the body, and all that could be seen was a basin full of blood. By and large, there was hardly any resemblance to an actual human being. If it was placed in front of others, they would not be able to see what it was, but in Zhang Ruan's eyes, it was something that totally unnerved her heart, sending it into a violent and tumultuous upheaval. That thing was not just anything, but it was her from the previous life. She was made into a human swine and beaten to death in this very basin. In the wooden basin right now, that Zhang Ruan was already dead, just a cold corpse with no dignity at all. Zhang Ruan stood aside, gritted her teeth and watched the maid carry the corpse. A head maid walked in front, and surprisingly that person was Hu Dai. Hadn't Hu Dai been expelled from the Jiangfu by Jiang Susu long ago, and sold to a brothel? How did she become the current palace lady again? Zhang Ruan looked again and a thought flashed in her mind. In her previous life she was killed with a stick, and she was reborn when she was in the rural residence. What happened after that remained unknown. Therefore, if her corpse was still here, then her enemies would still remain the same as before. Could it be that the heavens had given her this opportunity to see the final outcome of her previous life? Hu Dai led the maid who was holding the wooden basin all the way to a garden. Zhang Ruan could see clearly that it was the garden behind Kuanning Palace. Kuanning Palace. Zhang Ruan's heart trembled. Could it be? Sure enough, when they walked to the entrance of the garden, she heard a familiar voice saying, "Ben Gong is not bothered about anything as long as both of them are never able to be reborn in this world, forever and ever without a chance for reincarnation. What do you think? This priest will certainly do his best as the Empress has commanded." Zhang Ruan laughed coldly. Since presently no one could see her, she walked right into the garden, and sure enough, the woman sitting on the high seat was wearing the Empress royal court robe, looking grand and ceremonious. Her face bore a smile that rivaled flowers, and her complexion was as exquisite as an immortal, yet it carried a slight reserved sense of nobility. The 9-tailed phoenix hairpin on her head was glistening in the golden hue of the sunlight like widespread wings about to take flight. Her every movement distinctly personified the virtuous aura of the Mother of Nation. This person was none other than Jiang Susu. At this moment, Jiang Susu was reclining on a soft chair, and in this large garden, only she alone was seated while all the palace maids and eunuchs were standing in a row, their faces filled with terror. In addition, there was a man in a blue robe, dressed as a Taoist priest, standing before Jiang Susu. And if he was not Su Kong, then who else could he be? It turned out that Taoist priest Su Kong had always had some connection with Jiang Susu in her last life. It appeared that it wasn't just when he had played his role to proclaim that she would be a curse to her husband and her mother back then at the Jiangfu. At the moment, it also looked like Jiang Susu had promised him a lot of additional benefits. Otherwise, how could a wandering Taoist priest in the wild enter the palace? But what was he going to do now? "Your Majesty, this servant has brought that thing." Hu Dai stepped forward and spoke cautiously. Zhang Ruan stood to the side, watching with cold eyes. Jiang Susu smiled slightly at the announcement. Her smile was extremely beautiful, as if it expressed heartfelt joy. She looked very happy, and her sweet laughter could be heard throughout the garden. She was born beautiful and her smile was extremely mesmerizing, but at this moment, no one present was fascinated by it. Rather, their expressions revealed a trace of fear. Just because the monster in the wooden basin looked too scary, ordinary people would feel fear if they continued to look at it, but Jiang Susu was staring at the thing with absolute pleasure, as if it couldn't be more interesting. Everyone was silent. After a while, Jiang Susu seemed to have had enough of laughing and finally straightened up, lightly pointing to the side. Bengong and her are good sisters in name anyway. Taking into account that we once lived under the same roof, Bengong doesn't want to be too ruthless. Bengong has always been soft-hearted, so Bengong will bestow on them a mother and child reunion. Her words were spoken frivolously, as if what she said was of no consequences nor worth anything. Jiang Ruan's heart was panic-stricken, and suddenly she felt her blood freeze as if an ominous chill seemed to have been poured on top of her head, and it flowed down right into her heart, turning half of it cold. In a daze she looked in the direction that Jiang Susu pointed, and saw a small body lying on the ground. That body was so familiar that after merely a glance her tears welled up. A wail escaped from Jiang Ruan's throat with much difficulty, and it was unlike that of a Persa. It was the sound of raw despair that arose from the depths of deep-seated hatred. She recalled the scene when she had to helplessly watch Pear being exploited, while she was in the wooden basin. It was an extremely desperate moment for her. But now when she saw Pear's corpse with her own eyes, only then did she realize how much her heart hurt. The images that had been sealed in her memory had come alive again, and it turned out that she hadn't forgotten those heartaches and sorrow at all. Jiang Ruan threw herself beside Pear and burst into tears. However, her voice did not reach these people's ears, and the ending of this life would not change in any way. She was dead and so was Pear. That little body lying on the ground was covered in multiple bruises, each of which was a spectacle too horrible to endure. It was too frightening to see how they had used such a ruthless hand to deal with a small innocent child. Jiang Ruan only felt as if a knife was twisting in her heart. Before Pear died, he must have been absolutely terror-stricken as he suffered. "Your Majesty is merciful," Su Kong, the sanctimonious, fake Taoist priest said in a flattering manner. He walked quickly to Jiang Ruan's side, and picked up Pear without any effort. His strength was obviously great, as Pear's small body seemed to weigh nothing in his hands. Instinctively, Jiang Ruan lunged forward, but her hand just passed through Pear. She couldn't touch him at all. Su Kong grabbed the bodies of Pear and Jiang Ruan together, and put them in an agarwood box, and then closed the lid. Immediately after, a few strong guards came over and nailed the lid of the box with long nails. The lid was densely pasted with yellow talisman paper, and spells were written on it with blood-colored cinnabar, which made it difficult for people to see clearly. Su Kong sat cross-legged in front of the box, closed his eyes and clasped his hands together, muttering something for a quarter of an hour before he suddenly opened his eyes. Next he reached out to pick up a bowl of chicken blood from a table, bowed his head to take a sip, and then sprayed blood all over the coffin-like box. Afterwards, he let out a long breath, and ordered someone to throw the box into a dry well in the southwest corner of the garden. After finishing all this, Su Kong walked up to Jiang Susu, and said as if asking for credit, "Your Majesty, this priest has completed the ritual. The Demoness and the Evil Star have been sealed in the 9-star formation. Their eternal life will be suppressed in this dry well, unable to reincarnate, unable to escape. This priest has made sure that it's impossible for them to return and cause trouble to others." "Very good." Jiang Susu smiled with satisfaction. Since Bengong is this great Jin's empress, Bengong must take on the responsibility of the great Jin dynasty. Even familial ties cannot ruin the entire great Jin for their own personal interests. Since they are the incarnations of a demoness and an evil star, Bengong can't let them live and rise in revolt. Su Kong Daozhang has worked hard. Rest assured, Bengong will report this matter to His Majesty later, and give you credit for your merit. Su Kong was overjoyed and said, "Many thanks, Your Majesty." The people here were talking cheerfully, but Jiang Ruan's whole body felt cold as she listened. Jiang Susu actually hated her so much that she would not let her go even after death. Furthermore, she allowed Su Kong to seal her soul so she would be trapped here and tortured forever. If it weren't for Su Kong, who was actually a fake Taoist priest, wouldn't everything have happened as she wished? People always say that the heart of a woman was the most poisonous, but Jiang Susu's heart took maliciousness to another level. Tu Xuming, with an undeserved reputation, unwarranted fame/nowhere near as good as he's made out to be. Zhang Ruan looked at the pitch-dark dry well. As it turned out, this was their final resting place. This bottomless well in a godforsaken part of the palace, buried deep in its depths alongside rotting leaves. She wanted to cry but in the end could only manage a wry smile. As it turned out, in her previous life she had shamefully died like this, and even her final resting place was completely without any dignity. Just then, her vision blurred and once more she found that she was unable to move as the scene in front of her changed. The gate in front of her was extremely familiar. So where else could it be if not the Jiangfu? Jiang Quan was sitting in the study, and Jiang Susu was dressed in magnificent clothes. Her expression faintly revealed arrogance. Jiang Quan, on the other hand, looked unhappy and asked, "How could you act so arbitrary and cause trouble? I told you earlier to not act rashly in this matter. Since she was already paving the way for you, there was no need to act. If your actions come to light, wouldn't it render all my painstaking efforts useless?" Xia Yan had beautiful eyebrows and eyes, and her mannerism was dignified and gentle as she consoled him with a smile. "Leoi, don't be angry. Be magnanimous and listen to what Susu has to say. This child is not one to do things without knowing her limits and what's appropriate. From childhood until now, do you still not know what kind of person she is?" Jiang Susu quickly hid the trace of impatience in her eyes, and said in a respectful and innocent tone, "Father, your daughter knows what she did wrong, and I will never make such a mistake again. Originally, I only wanted to scare her, but my subordinates acted on their own initiative and made her look like that. Father, don't be angry with your daughter. It's not worthwhile to ruin your health. Your daughter will never dare to do something like this again in the future." Her docile and submissive manner was acted to perfection and gradually the anger on Jiang Quan's face dissipated. Then he released a long drawn-out sigh and said, "My original plan was to use her to pave the way for you. If not for your reckless action, the Jiang family could later showcase how it places righteousness before family, and can readily punish one's own family if justice demanded it. In this way we could obtain a good reputation and your position as the Empress would be more stable, while also gaining the hearts of the nation. But now that you've privately done away with her, it's a good thing that no one has discovered the truth. Therefore, we will say that she has committed suicide out of fear of retribution. Susu, if you want to do things, you have to do them more cleanly. Don't leave anything that can be used against you." His tone was completely fatherly, and every word and every sentence was laced with worry and concern for Jiang Susu. Jiang Susu smiled slightly. "Father, don't worry. Susu does everything cleanly. Everything has been already taken care of." "Very well then." Jiang Quan let out a sigh of relief as if a huge stone had been lifted from his heart. Jiang Ruan stood quietly and watched. There was no longer any trace of hatred in her eyes, only a bone-piercing kind of coldness. It was a kind of cold that even ice found in the depths of winter was no match for. Her eyes were empty, and her crimson clothes were like a blazing fireball bursting out of her soul, seeking to consume and obliterate all who came close to her. It turned out that the truth of the previous life was like this. After her father, Jiang Quan, learned of her death and the fact that she was executed privately by Jiang Susu, he did not shed a tear and cry out for injustice on her behalf. Instead, all of their focus and concerns were for Jiang Susu. He was afraid that Jiang Susu would make a mistake and endanger her empress position. As for his deceased daughter, he could only spare a comment along the lines of, "Make sure it was done cleanly without any loose ends." Jiang Quan took her as a stepping stone for Jiang Susu's empress seat as a matter of course, as if it should be like this. But they forgot that she was also the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu, one who was discarded like a worn shoe, while the other was held like a pearl. At this moment, Jiang Ruan did not have an ounce of affection for Jiang Quan and truly regarded him as an enemy, And if she could, she was willing to use every vile and despicable method to torture him. Jiang Susu suddenly seemed to recall something, and said, Jiang Dan is becoming more and more imprudent. Her husband used to handle matters for His Majesty outside, but nowadays he holds a formidable reputation that is on par with a first-rank official. They don't take me seriously either. Zhang Ruan was taken aback. Jiang Dan's husband actually worked for Xianli? Jiang Dan had also been promoted to a rank. Jiang Quan shook his head. No matter how powerful she is, can she surpass you? Susu, you have to remember that she cannot compare with you either in the Jiangfu or in the Imperial Palace, or even under the Great Jin Dynasty. The only daughter of Jiangfu has always been you. Her husband is now relied upon by His Majesty, and he is also a great help to you in the palace. You must not display such childish tendencies, and remember to get along with her well. I understand, Jiang Susu pouted in dissatisfaction. Jiang Ruan, who was standing aside, suddenly realized that what she didn't understand in the previous life, and the present life became clear at this moment. With her temperament, how could Jiang Dan be willing to pave the way for Jiang Susu as a pawn of the Jiang family? It turned out that her merchant husband had been working for Xianli from the beginning. Jiang Dan really had means, so after her Jr. death, she got an imperial order promoting her by virtue of that husband. In the end, Jiang Ruan was the only one who was sacrificed in the previous life. Looking at the ironic scene in front of her, she only felt a salty taste filling her mouth. Immediately afterwards, the scene in front of her changed yet again, and this time it was a magnificent palace but a place she was not familiar with. And yet, the person sitting on the edge of the bed, the man in bright yellow clothes, she knew all too well. It was her beloved in the previous life, and her nemesis in this life, Xianli. His once gentle and jade-like appearance had already been eclipsed by the distinctive calm and reticent traits of a monarch. Dressed in his dragon robes, he was completely unlike the Xianli Jiang Ruan's memory. He used to always smile, which made others feel warm and comfortable, much like a soothing spring breeze, and even though it was just a fake mask, it was still pleasing to the eye. But at present, Xianli's brows were tightly knotted up in a frown, and his expression was haggard, so much so that she couldn't find even a trace of his proud appearance of the past. Shangxinyuimama. Warms the heart and delights the eye / pleasing / delightful. Eunuch Chan, Xianli said to the young eunuch in front of him, I can't sleep again today. Does your majesty want to go to the empress's palace? Her gentle and soft voice may soothe your majesty's mood, Eunuch Chan said. No need. Xianli waved his hand. It's the same everywhere. I have nightmares every day to the point that I can't sleep peacefully, and when I wake up from them I always feel that someone is watching me. Standing beside the dragon bed, Jiang Ruan looked at Xianli, who looked visibly pale, and sneered silently. So there were times when he too couldn't sleep well? He slyly planned everything and sent her to the palace as an excellent pawn. His plan was eventually accomplished and he occupied the lofty emperor's seat. But now he couldn't sleep at night? So in the end, what was all of it for? Was it true that people would receive retribution after doing bad deeds? In his nightmare, did she turn into a ghost and come to claim his life? Your Majesty has been working hard on state affairs, Eunuch Chan suggested. I only began to feel tired after sitting in this position, just like I think the women in the harem are tedious. They are not even as good as Jiang Ruan back then. He seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of regret appeared on his face. It's just a pity. If only she didn't have that identity, I would have treated her well. After all, I did have some affection for her back then. You had affection for me? After hearing this, Jiang Ruan couldn't help laughing. However, that smile didn't reach her eyes. Despite knowing that Xianli couldn't hear her, she still said coldly, the person who you loved was just a fool who regarded you as a god. I was just an idiot who was always obedient to you and asked for nothing in return. Before, I was too ignorant and too stupid, and so I believed in your nonsense. And now you say this, are you lying to me or yourself? Xianli, you only love all the victims in this world because they gave themselves up for your ambition. You readily sacrificed them, yet you still pretend to comfort them. How hypocritical. The scene in Ming Huanglong's palace gradually faded away. The scene in front of her became a blur again. Jiang Ruan walked in the white mist and felt as if she was walking in a huge maze. She could only hear the sound of thousands of troops fighting in her ears, with the loud bang of the city gate being knocked open. The sound of swords clashing was everywhere, and someone shouted loudly, "It's not good, it's not good. The genie guards have entered the main gate." Genie guards? The name was so familiar, as if she had heard it somewhere before. Jiang Ruan walked forward in a daze. She saw that the Golden Throne Hall was in complete chaos, with blood flowing like rivers. From time to time, guards in black armor with swords walked past. The Imperial guards outside were either dead or wounded, while inside the hall, a man and a woman in bright yellow clothes fell under the throne, exactly in the same manner as she had died before, except that she was able to return back alive while they were dead. A young man in black stood quietly in front of the dragon throne. His face was exquisitely beautiful. His eyebrows were as cold as ice. Although there was elegance and nobility engraved in his bone marrow, it was suppressed by his cold detachment. The guard on the side said, "An illegitimately conferred dog thief, how dare you talk nonsense? Don't you know best who the real traitor is? Hasn't General Guan also sent that old thief Jiang Quan to his death, master?" The young man turned around and said calmly, "Let's go. Xian Li and Jiang Su Su." From the beginning, one of them had plotted to obtain the most supreme power in the world, while the other coveted the position of the mother of the world. And yet they were killed just like this after their great cause was accomplished. Even Jiang Quan himself was decapitated. It was obvious that this young man was the future emperor who had intercepted their plans to take the throne for himself. This pleased Jiang Ruan very much. Looking at the young man again, she felt her heart beating extremely fast, as if she had met this young man somewhere before, but she really couldn't remember. She wanted to find out what was going on, so she followed him and walked forward. Once she followed him to the Imperial Garden, a middle-aged man with gray hair came forward and said, "Young master, Imperial Grand Tutor Lu found something in the dry well, and took out a box from the well. There were 2 corpses in it. After investigating, we found out that one of them was the eldest daughter of the Jiang Fu. She was the one who was slandered by her own father as a demoness who brought calamity to the nation." He shook his head and said, "Ah, how can there be such a cruel father in the world?" The young man and Jiang Ruan looked at the ground together. The 2 corpses, one big and one small, had decayed, looking gray and black. However, it could be seen that the adult's limbs had been removed, and it was quite evident that she had been greatly wronged before she died. Jiang Ruan looked at her dead body indifferently. A young man in purple came over. He was born handsome, with a mustache around his lips that made him look quite comical. Looking at the corpse, he sighed and said, "They are from the same root, so why treat each other differently? This woman was originally a beauty in the palace, and this child, 13th prince, was raised under her knees. It's a shame that mother and child have ended up like this together. It's really regrettable." He bent down, took off his clothes and covered the corpse, then looked at the young man in black and said, "Third brother, what should you do with the corpse? As an imperial consort, she should truly enter the imperial tomb. Find a good time and bury them properly." The young man lowered his eyes and said calmly, "By the way, let the world know the truth about the so-called demoness who brought calamity to the nation." Upon hearing these words, Jiang Ruan felt like she was struck by lightning, and stared fixedly at the cold and handsome young man. She originally thought that she would have to silently bear the injustice until eternity, but at her darkest hour, the words of this young man were the last trace of warmth she received in her cruel life. Yet, just when everything was coming to an end in this life, a sliver of yearning appeared. Luan Huiming. Lit. The willow trees make the shade, the flowers give the light. At one's darkest hour, a glimmer of hope/light at the end of the tunnel. She suddenly opened her eyes and called out, "Xiao Xiao." Chapter 192. Chapter 192. Letting go of her inner demons. Xiao Xiao. Jiang Ruan opened her eyes and suddenly sat upright in the bed. The oil lamp was lit, and the burning charcoal in the house was extraordinarily warm in winter. A very concerned voice spoke out, "You've awakened?" Zhang Ruan looked up to see the cold and handsome young man from her dream sitting beside the bed. Perhaps he was also startled awake by her sudden awakening, because his gaze showed a slight anxiousness. Yet his pupils were cold and dark, like a calm deep pool that incessantly draws people to dive beneath its depths. "You?" Zhang Ruan was momentarily disheartened. The bitter past was but a dream, but it had been a long dream in which she had revisited experiences from her past lifetime, and had seen the various ends of all the people from that life. Now upon seeing Xiao Xiao, it felt as though all of that had happened in a different lifetime. Seeing her in a daze, Xiao Xiao was slightly startled, and was about to get up to pour her a cup of water. "You must be feeling thirsty. You have been in a coma for more than 10 days, so drink some water." But as he was standing, Zhang Ruan grabbed his hand. Xiao Xiao turned around and raised his eyebrows before sitting down again beside Zhang Ruan. "What's wrong?" His voice was soft and reassuring, allowing the person who had just awakened from experiencing unprecedented brutality and tragedy while dreaming to sense a shred of reality. As Zhang Ruan timidly stretched out her hand towards Xiao Xiao, Xiao Xiao frowned because when she touched his collar, it was as if she was verifying that the person before her was indeed real. After pausing for a while with her hands on the collar, Zhang Ruan suddenly wrapped her hands around Xiao Xiao's neck and leaped forward to hug him tightly. Zhang Ruan's actions were quite surprising and Xiao Xiao was slightly taken aback. But after being stunned for a moment, he looked at Zhang Ruan with some hesitation. Zhang Ruan's head was buried in his neck, and the hands around his neck were extremely tight. After some thought, he stretched out his hand and patted Zhang Ruan's back lightly. He softly called, "Arwan." "Xiao Xiao." Zhang Ruan's voice was a bit strange, as if she was suppressing a certain emotion, but her next words were also a little strange. "I didn't understand at first why it was you, but now I understand." Her voice slowly lowered, almost inaudible. "It turns out that you had already appeared a long time ago. In this world, fate and destiny does not happen by chance or randomness." While it seemed as though there should not have been any relationship or encounters between the two of them, in this life, both of them were constantly entangled in one another's lives. Initially, she had just attributed this to mere coincidence, until she experienced a dream of a lifetime asterisk, and everything from the past reappeared in front of her eyes. Some things suddenly became clear in her mind. In the previous life, Xiao Xiao indirectly avenged her and unknowingly gave her justice for the wrongs done to her. Was it because of this that in this life she had become his lifelong companion in order to repay him? Nankiming. Lit. A dream of Nank. Figure dreams of grandeur. The idiom Nank Yiming tells people that the world is impermanent. All the wealth and glory are just like the void of an ant's nest, and they will leave one day, so there is no need to be obsessed with it. People pursue prosperity and wealth and expect fame and fortune, but they often find that what they have obtained through hard work and painstaking efforts is easily lost, and it is so short-lived that people feel unreal, as if it is an illusory dream. Is there truly such a thing as karma in this world? Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. His long eyelashes lowered to hide the meaning in his eyes, thus no emotions could be seen in them. However, his movements remained gentle as he softly patted Zhang Ruan's back. Even the silence was reassuring. After some time he felt hot liquid flowing down his neck. Was she actually crying? Xiao Xiao's heart skipped a beat. He slowly held Zhang Ruan's shoulders, and lifted her chin with one hand to see that the bright face that always had a smile was now covered in tears. A big teardrop hung on her chin, sparkling and translucent, and teetering on the verge of falling, just like her expression at the moment. You, Xiao Xiao was stunned by her expression, and was about to speak, when unexpectedly he saw the woman before him suddenly lunge forward, and in the next moment he felt a soft light fleeting sensation as something warm touched his lips. Xiao Xiao frowned and his body stiffened. Zhang Ruan's actions today were very unusual. This was not to say that she would make such a move on any other day, but it was very strange to behold such passion in her. He wanted to pull Zhang Ruan away, but her slender arms hugged him even tighter as if she was afraid that he would run away. Xiao Xiao's heart softened, and Zhang Ruan seemed to have been further encouraged as her lips never left his for a moment. Rather, she acted even more boldly. Xiao Xiao's fair and handsome face immediately blushed. The beauty had thrown herself into his arms, and she was the woman he liked such that even a normal man would not be indifferent. However, no matter how cold Xiao Xiao was normally, he would always be gentle to her. The sense of plunder and the desire to conquer were always there in the man's bones. He was a strong and domineering man, but he just hid it under his indifferent appearance, and more often than not it was overlooked by others. At this moment, he tightened his arms around her and drew her tightly into his embrace. With one hand he held onto the back of her head, and switching from defense to offense, he resolutely deepened the kiss. Their lips and tongues met. Drastically different from their gentle and cold outward appearance, this kiss was overbearing and passionate, almost as if they were engulfing each other. Expectedly, when their passion intensified, all their suppressed emotions were simultaneously communicated. It was a display of tender love and remaining inseparable in the midst of conquering death. The stunning beauty held the handsome young man tightly, and raised her head ready to accept their fated union from the two lives. The posture was so beautiful that snowflakes couldn't help but melt, as if looking at spring flowers bursting forth with colors in the cold winter. The image was like 10 miles of peach blossoms in the frozen wilderness, beautiful and fleeting. The door was suddenly opened. Qi Feng and Xia Qing stared at the scene in front of them, and froze where they stood. Xiao Xiao moved very fast, and shielded Zhang Ruan's head in his arms with one hand, before shooting daggers at the two intruders. Xia Qing's face turned red instantly before he scratched his head, and said with a guilty conscience, "Third brother, I came over to see third sister-in-law. You guys continue." After saying that, he pulled at Qi Feng. Qi Feng withdrew his sad eyes and smiled, saying, "Fifth brother Xia and I will go see Shifu after that." He closed the door and the two left together. Zhang Ruan had already returned to her senses when she heard the voices. At once she buried her head in Xiao Xiao's arms. The man's cool and refreshing scent filled the tip of her nose. For a moment she didn't dare to look up at Xiao Xiao. Just now she got excited for a moment and did such a disrespectful thing. It was just an impulsive act, and she didn't know what Xiao Xiao was thinking at the moment. "Are you trying to suffocate yourself?" Xiao Xiao wanted to laugh a little, and pried Zhang Ruan, who looked like an ostrich, from his arms. Zhang Ruan's cheeks were hot, but she pretended to be calm and asked, "Where is this place? What's wrong with me?" Seeing her like this, Xiao Xiao seemed to find it very amusing. He reached out and touched her head, then replied, "This is Emgenan, the place where I apprenticed. You were poisoned when you were young, and someone reactivated the poison. Therefore I brought you here for treatment." "Poisoned?" Zhang Ruan was startled. "You said when I was young." "Yes." A chill flashed in Xiao Xiao's eyes. "You were born with this poison. I know." Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. "After I defeated Xia Yan, I heard her say that in order to get rid of my mother and me when I was young, she let my fourth sister, now noble consort Zhang, poison me. It was only later when I was sent to the rural residence that I stopped ingesting the poison." This was the first time that she had taken the initiative to tell Xiao Xiao about her own affairs. Xiao Xiao glanced at her in surprise, but when he heard about Zhang Dan, he frowned and stated, "Your mother once raised Zhang Dan." "It's a pity we raised a wolf," Zhang Ruan said. "She was afraid of Xia Yan's threats. Originally she only wanted to poison my mother, but later she was just afraid that I would divide her favor, so she poisoned me too. Perhaps she was not just afraid that I would take away her favor, but she was also taking the opportunity to pave the way for the future. In her previous life, Zhang Dan was just a Shu daughter, and yet she was finally able to earn the title of a first-rank wife. This showed that she started her plotting early on. Moreover, who knew if her poisoning was all a part of some conspiracy? "Leave this matter to me," Xiao Xiao said lightly. "You just need to recover your health." "No need," Zhang Ruan said. Xiao Xiao paused. Zhang Ruan looked at him and smiled. "I want to handle this matter on my own because I know who that person is." "Who?" Xiao Xiao asked. "The person who poisoned me this time." Zhang Ruan lowered her eyes. "I was careless, but I will be careful in the future." She raised her head and smiled at Xiao Xiao. Although her smile was very light, there was something different. Xiao Xiao was sensitive to the fact that something seemed to have changed, and he was momentarily startled before looking at her closely without saying anything more. In the imperial palace in the concubines' hall, a woman was dressed in brocade clothes, and her expression seemed to be very comfortable. The room was filled with warmth, the scent of the incense delicately rose, and exquisite jade articles were randomly placed on shelves. It was obvious that the mistress of these collectible items was extremely favored. Jiang Dan slowly picked up a plum from the crystal plate and put it in her mouth. Looking at the man in the gray robe in front of her, she asked, "In the end, I did as you said. But why on earth did you want me to say that?" The man's robe was so long that it completely covered his feet, and his hat almost covered half of his face, leaving only his beautiful chin exposed. His tone was a bit slow and strange. Those who know too much will only end up in greater trouble. Does noble consort Jiang really want to know? Jiang Dan suddenly stopped playing with the plum in her mouth, and a trace of tension flashed across her face. She was a smart person, so she knew what he meant. Unlike Jiang Susu, she never had the desire to control others and put herself in the highest position. Many years ago, she knew how to hide and lie low, and she always knew to accept what was good for her. The deep meaning of this person's words was really thought-provoking, and Jiang Dan had an intuition that the person opposite her was not ordinary. Immediately she laughed and said, "I don't care why you wanted me to say those words, as long as they can achieve the desired result. Previously you said that as long as I mention those things, Zhang Ruan would no longer be able to exist in this world. Seeing as how it has been ages since I have heard any news about her, it can't be that you've failed too, right?" Not too long ago in the palace, Jiang Dan had met this man in the gray robe through Xian Li. The man in gray had then sent Xian Li away and began to talk to her about matters pertaining to Zhang Ruan. The strange thing was that he seemed to be able to understand her fear of Zhang Ruan, and proposed that they collaborate to make Zhang Ruan disappear from this world. With Jiang Dan's cautious temperament, ordinarily she wouldn't have agreed to the request of his so hastily. But now that Zhang Ruan was the Wangfei of the Jinying Wangfu, and was also highly favored by Xiao Xiao, this really made Jiang Dan disgruntled. If Zhang Ruan could be dealt with as soon as possible, that would be the best outcome. Besides, this matter did not require her to take any risks, as all she needed to do was to say a few words. Although she didn't know what method he was using, it was clear that Zhang Ruan had unknowingly offended a seemingly difficult person, which to Jiang Dan was something that she relished and took great delight in. "Your doubts are unnecessary," he said. "If you don't believe me, noble consort Jiang can do it herself." Jiang Dan's complexion paled. Then she smiled and said, "I believe in you. I am waiting for your good news, and after it is done, I have to thank you a lot." Noble consort Jiang should be thanking herself. The man in gray suddenly laughed. Although she couldn't see his expression, she could hear the smile in his voice, faintly discernible as it brushed over a person's heart. It was truly a terrifying sensation. He said, "If it weren't for noble consort Zhang's machination many years ago, today's affairs would not be so easy to accomplish, so it is also thanks to noble consort Zhang's planning many years ago." His every word seemed to hit Jiang Dan hard, making her tremble, as if someone had pried into her deepest secret, and she almost collapsed on the chair. She thought that except for Xia Yan, no one else in the world knew about this matter, and Xia Yan was dead, so there was nothing to fear. Yet this stranger from unknown origins seemed to know of this. How did he gather this information? What was he up to again? She forced herself to be calm and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." The man in the gray robe stood up slowly, his voice containing a hint of ominousness. "Noble consort Jiang, there is no need for you to worry too much, as my goal is the same as yours. After all, our mutual intention is for her to disappear. On this point you are no different from me. With regards to all other things, I don't have the time to care or give any advice. So noble consort Jiang, why do you worry so much? You have a grudge against her?" Jiang Dan probed. "In fact, I have no enmity with Hong and Junju." The man's answer made Jiang Dan's heart tighten. Immediately she heard him saying, "But because she is a hindrance to someone, then it is imperative that she must disappear." The answer from the man made Jiang Dan heave a long sigh. She secretly suppressed the doubts in her heart, said with a smile on her face, "No matter what, I'm waiting for your good news." The scenery of Mtgnon was different from that of the capital. There was no trace of the bustling atmosphere of the city. On the contrary, it was like a paradise. When Zhang Ruan woke up, she found that the place she was staying in was extremely beautiful. Although she was a person who didn't care about the outer trappings of things, she was absolutely enthralled by the beautiful scenery in front of her. This place seems to be isolated from the outside world, and it was not polluted by smoke and fire. It seemed that as long as someone stepped into this place, their entire being would be cleansed of any regrets in their hearts. It was at the Luyang Villa where Zhang Ruan met Xiao Xiao's master teacher Ba Qi. He was an old man who looked very much like an immortal, quite different from the pretentiousness of Su Kong. He had a disposition that transcended worldliness and the mundane life. He was gentle. When playing a game of chess with Zhang Ruan, she could see that his mind was lucid and sharp, and he was indeed a person of great wisdom. Because Xia Qing couldn't find a cure for the poison in Zhang Ruan's body, he had been studying for the past few days. He had once again dug out all the medical books in the attic of Mtgnon, trying to make up for his lack of knowledge, had holed himself in the attic all day long and didn't meet with anyone. At this time Xiao Xiao and Qi Feng had gone out to hunt, leaving only Zhang Ruan and teacher Ba Qi in the huge Luyang villa. The chessboard was exquisite, and teacher Ba Qi picked up a black stone and then set it down before suddenly saying, "A Xiao is very nervous about you." Zhang Ruan raised her head to look up at teacher Ba Qi, and teacher Ba Qi smiled slightly. "Girl, pay attention to the game." His expression was calm. Zhang Ruan couldn't think of anything else. Reaching out, she picked up a white stone from the porcelain jar and placed it. "I know." "Girl, do you like a Xiao?" teacher Ba Qi asked. It was a bit strange for an elder to ask a junior this question, let alone as Xiao Xiao's mentor. Zhang Ruan didn't want to hide this from the wise old man in front of her, so she replied without hesitation, "I like him. I have had 9 disciples in total, and of the 9 disciples, a Xiao has the coldest temperament." Teacher Ba Qi placed another chess piece without raising his head, but his voice reflected his lingering recollection of the past. At that time he learned the art of Qi Huang, which is traditional Chinese medicine. Even when everything was fine in the Jining Wangfu, he had to bear many responsibilities. However, although he learned the art of Qi Huang, he didn't regard it as important. In fact, he is the most intelligent among my disciples. Teacher Ba Qi smiled. Unfortunately, later something happened in the Jining Wangfu. A Xiao knelt before me, wanting to learn the art of assassination. He became somewhat melancholic. A Xiao's temperament wasn't suitable to be that of a killer, and I did not agree to his request. That day, there was a heavy snowfall on Mtgnon, but still, he knelt at the foot of the mountain for 3 days and 3 nights. Zhang Ruan's hand paused slightly. Then she set down a stone. The Xiao Xiao being described was not something she had seen before. Yet, when something happened in the Jining Wangfu for Xiao Xiao, it would be very similar to how she felt when something untoward had happened to Zhao Mei and Zhang Xianji. It was a pain that pierced right into the depths of their hearts. Now Xiao Xiao was calm and introverted, and there was not a trace of joy or anger, almost as if nothing could ever shake his stoic indifference. However, when she thought about the noble young man who had raised the corner of his robe and slowly knelt down at the foot of the mountain that was covered with snow, his back straight and upright, that poignant silent serene scene was more than sufficient to move anyone's heart. Later, this old man conceded to his request. A Xiao treated himself ruthlessly, because he wanted to be a person he was not suited to be. He has been with the genie guards for so many years, yet he has never spoken of any hardship. This old man believes that it's all his willpower. After all these years, he doesn't seem to have any weaknesses. He looked at Zhang Ruan with a smile in his eyes. "Girl, you are his first. You are his weakness." He was sharp and straightforward with his words, and suddenly the game on the chessboard underwent earth-shaking changes. He said, however, "This old man is very happy that you can become his weakness because in this way, he looks more like a human." Zhang Ruan was silent for a moment, and looked pensive as she placed her stone. "I won't hurt him, he is my husband. If someone makes things difficult for him, no matter whether I can do it or not, I will use all that I have within me to avenge him." In her previous life, He was benevolent towards her. In this life it was not enough to just marry him to repay his kindness. What's more, he had helped her time and again in this life. There was no way to repay all the debts that she owed him, so why not just owe him for the rest of their lives? After all, she had already tied herself to Xiao Xiao. Teacher Ba Qi stroked his beard and swiftly placed another stone. Is it because of the previous life's karma that you want to protect A Xiao so much? Zhang Ruan's hands trembled, almost unable to hold the chess piece in her hand. Her gaze instantly became indifferent and vigilant, and she looked at the old man sitting across from her without saying a word. A Xiao has always been decisive. When you were in a coma, you once muttered a few words. A Xiao is very smart. It's not that he doesn't know. It's just that he will not take the initiative to ask. A Xiao refuses to ask, but this old man wants to ask on his behalf. This old man is A Xiao's Shifu, and in my heart, I regard A Xiao as my own child. Although you are the girl that A Xiao likes in the eyes of this old man, you aren't forthright and candid with him. Teacher Ba Qi continued slowly. Zhang Ruan's heart surged and welled up into turbulent waves. So Xiao Xiao knew about it. She naturally knew that there was no need for Teacher Ba Qi to lie about this matter. So that meant that Xiao Xiao had probably figured out her secret. When she saw the ending of her previous life in her dream, maybe she said something unintentionally. At that moment, a sense of humiliation arose in Zhang Ruan's heart, as she felt exposed as if she was pried open and picked clean. It didn't matter if it was known by others, but that person happened to be Xiao Xiao. She was a downtrodden and disgraceful person, born from the depths of darkness. How would Xiao Xiao see her now? Girl, you don't have to worry. Teacher Ba Qi seemed to see her concerns and said gently, since A Xiao didn't choose to ask, he doesn't care about it. The one who is most concerned about those things isn't him, but you. I don't know how Shifu knows about this matter. Zhang Ruan said with difficulty, I didn't intend to hide it from him, but I just couldn't face it. Is it A Xiao that you can't face or yourself? Teacher Ba Qi asked. Zhang Ruan was taken aback. Shifu, what do you mean by this? A Xiao doesn't care about this matter. No matter what the ending is, he is willing to endure all the hardships. If you are concerned about his thoughts, then there is no need for you to do so because he won't change his feelings towards you because of this matter. The person whom you can't face is always yourself. Shifu is right, I really can't face myself. Zhang Ruan said, I am not afraid of other people's opinions. It doesn't matter to me if I am regarded as a monster or a ghost. But if I put such a me in front of him, I feel ashamed and wanting. She spoke frankly, without even the slightest concealment. I can't face the fact that the person standing beside him is one such as myself, and because of this I had planned to never take the initiative to tell him. If it wasn't for this incident, I would have never spoken of this secret for the rest of my life. Talking about such things will only create more trouble, and I don't want to add to the trouble. What about now? Teacher Ba Qi smiled slightly. As Shifu said he doesn't care, then why should I care? Zhang Ruan lightly replied. When I revisited the past, I saw many things that I didn't understand before. I also understood some questions that I couldn't answer before. I just feel that I owe him a lot and some things are predestined, so why should I stop them? Shifu can be at ease. I will tell him the whole truth. After hearing these things, whether he hates and despises me or not, it's his decision to make. I will respect it. After saying these words, Zhang Ruan seemed to have let go of a heavy burden that she had shouldered for many years. The secret of her rebirth has been buried deep in her heart for so many years. Each step she had made was challenging and difficult, yet she had never thought to share the load with anyone, not even with her brother Jiang Xing. She was prepared to carry this weight all by herself till the end. But now there was another person to share the load with her. Maybe the burden would lighten by a lot or maybe not. But no matter what the outcome would be, she was happy to face whatever the future holds, and no longer be heavy-hearted. She spoke so frankly, and a flash of appreciation was shown in Teacher Ba Qi's eyes. He said slowly, Congratulations, girl. You no longer have any inner demons. Zhang Ruan was taken aback, and Teacher Ba Qi said, You just said that you didn't tell A Xiao because it was difficult to face him, but now I think it's not such a bad thing. The old man in front of her suddenly winked at her mischievously as his voice was filled with teasing. At least, it shows that you really care about a Xiao. Chapter 193. Chapter 193. Past Affairs of Disciples of Mt. Jianan. Deep in a dense forest far away, a man in purple reined in his horse and dismounted. Looking at the young man in black sitting atop his horse, he remarked, "Third brother, your aim is still so good after all these years." Xiao Xiao followed suit and got off his horse. Attached to one side of the saddle at the back of the horse were many glistening furs. And on the other side was the game that they had hunted, skewered together and hung upside down. Amongst them was the exquisite pelt of an elusive white wolf. Its entire body was covered from top to bottom with snow-white fur that did not have a single blemish. It was quite large and the arrow that ended its life still pierced its throat. Hunting in this snowy forest was already difficult, and the color of the white wolf's fur blended in with the snow, so one had to have excellent sight to detect it. The wolf was so massive, strong and vigorous, but it was a pity that it met Xiao Xiao because in the end it was destined to become an accessory to be worn. "It's just a beast." Xiao Xiao did not seem to care. Qifeng paused. "Third brother has hunted down the white wolf because you want to make a cloak for third sister-in-law, and this white wolf fur is hard to find. Now that third sister-in-law is beginning to recover from her severe ailment, it is essential that she takes good care of her body." Xiao Xiao glanced at him but did not speak. In fact, Qifeng was right. Seeing his indifference, Qifeng didn't mind, just shook his head and smiled. "Although the white wolf fur is good, it's a pity that third sister-in-law hates white the most. If it was red fox fur, she would be much happier." Xiao Xiao's footsteps paused as he stopped to look at him. Then he asked nonchalantly, "What is it that you want to say?" There was a wry smile on Qifeng's face. Recently, the relationship between the two of them had become a bit strange, to the degree that even Xia Qing, that stupid and brainless fool, could see that something was wrong. Since the day Zhang Ruan fell into a coma, Qifeng's actions had made Xiao Xiao unhappy. He looked into the distance, towards the undulating mountains where the peaks of Mt. Jianan could be faintly seen. He said, "Third brother, you are the third senior brother of Mt. Jianan. Back then, among the 9 disciples under Shifu, you were the most intelligent, and nothing was difficult for you. However, even though I trained in the arts of politics and strategy, in terms of abilities and intelligence, I am still not as good as you." Xiao Xiao cast his eyes downward. There was no way of knowing what he was thinking. Qifeng's voice seemed to carry past memories as he recollected. "At first you were cold and treated everyone coldly, except second brother who managed to converse a little with you. Otherwise, you didn't give the rest of us the time of day. At that time we were all young and egotistical teenagers, and seeing you behave like that, all of us thought that you were proud and arrogant. Consequently, it was natural that none of us wanted to associate with you." Qifeng smiled slightly. At the beginning, the 9 disciples resided together on Mt. Jiangan. All they had to do on the mountain every day was to train and study. At that time they only felt that life was hard. It wasn't until much later, when they completed their tutelage and were masters in their own rights and had gone down the mountain, that they really experienced firsthand the ostentatious schemes and pandemonium that was behind the never-ending affairs of the world. Only then did they realize how beautiful their days on the mountain had been. "It was at this very place where third brother once saved my life," Qifeng said suddenly. "I still remember how third brother looked at that time. You didn't say anything. I was very scared, but you didn't look anxious at all. At that time I thought you were really amazing. From then on, I began to sincerely admire you." Many years ago, on a snowy day like today, several of the brothers went out to hunt in the forest. During the winter, deep within the mountain forests, there ought not to have been any wild animals. However, unexpectedly on that day, he had chanced upon a big black bear foraging for food. The black bear was tall and fierce. At that time, Guanliang Han and the others were too far away from Qifeng to be able to help him out. They could only look. With his measly bit of martial arts, and about to lose his life under the black bear's sharp teeth, an arrow shot out of nowhere and pierced the black bear's mouth. The bear flew into a rage, but by then that person had already rushed up from behind. His arrow was now useless, so Xiao Xiao drew out the short dagger that he had on him, and without a change in his expression he confronted the bear head-on. No matter how skilled a person was, any close contact with a wild beast was highly disadvantageous, and without a doubt would inevitably lead to a loss. Not to mention the fact that Xiao Xiao only had a short dagger in his hand, 1 inch short and 1 inch dangerous. The shorter the weapon, the higher the risk in order to be close enough to the opponent to make a counterattack. One could imagine just how dangerous the situation was because by the time Xiao Xiao finally subdued the black bear, he had suffered multiple injuries. It's just that he always wore black clothes, and the bloodstains couldn't be seen. At first glance, except for his pale face, he was still as impassive and indifferent as usual. At that time Qi Feng was very nervous, but Xiao Xiao didn't say anything. Honestly speaking, there was no deep hatred between the teenagers, only minor conflicts that would arise from time to time due to differences of opinions. It was far better to resolve any animosity than to foster grudges and hatred, and at that moment, Xiao Xiao's calm and collected indifference made Qi Feng gain a whole new respect for him. As a result of that particular incident, he was somewhat able to understand this cold-faced senior brother, that is, he was not as indifferent and uncaring as he appeared to be. It was just that he was just not good at expressing his emotions. Qi Feng's heart was set on admiring such a courageous person, and it was precisely because of this that after leaving his master, he did not enter the imperial court as everyone thought he would. Instead he went to Baizhonglu, which was managed by Xiao Xiao's genie guards, covertly working and assisting him behind the scene. Because in Qi Feng's eyes, following Xiao Xiao and aiding his cause was more honorable and prestigious than any so-called gratification from an imperial court. Rousing from his musing of the past, Qi Feng smiled slightly. What I want to say is that third brother will always be the person I admire the most. I will not fight for anything, and I have no other thoughts. Third sister-in-law is the most extraordinary woman I have ever seen. He sighed softly. If I had met her earlier, I would not have been so willing. But since she is your wife, she is just my third sister-in-law. Although in the end, he couldn't hide the sadness in his voice. I never thought you had other thoughts. Xiao Xiao interrupted him, with the same indifferent tone as before. You would not. The 3 words you would not seemed placid. But in that instant, it brought about a warmth that could be felt even on this blistery cold mountain. In fact, people like Xiao Xiao would not trust others easily, but those words embodied a kind of absolute confidence. Qi Feng was downtrodden, and with a bitter taste in his mouth, he shook his head and said, I have always felt that if any of our fellow brothers wanted to catch up with you, it would be absolutely impossible. You are by far way better than any of us. In the end he lost because after all it wasn't just about meeting sooner or later. Xiao Xiao was indeed an excellent person, and he was well suited for Jiang Ruan. Thus, with today's conversation, Qi Feng was finally able to bare his heart, as he truly wanted to resolve their misunderstanding. Xiao Xiao's answer also showed his attitude. Although his heart remained grieved, ultimately he was able to put the matter to rest. And so, wanting to liven up the mood, Qi Feng changed the subject with a smile and said, no matter what, third sister-in-law will be fine after a while. Surviving a catastrophe will only bring more blessings. It's just that this matter definitely has something to do with South Xinjiang. From the looks of things, the people from South Xinjiang have already arrived in the capital, and must be preparing to make their move. Also, Xianli has close relations with South Xinjiang, so conceivably he may also be involved in this matter. I will never let him go, Xiao Xiao said. He is probably up to his old tricks again, Qi Feng said. Back when he did those things, he totally squandered the friendship and camaraderie between our fellow brothers. Although Shifu expelled him from the sect, every time I think about this I feel disgusted in my heart. Qi Feng sighed. With his petty vindictive nature, and should a day come that the throne falls into his hands, the first people he will not spare will be from Mt Jianan. There won't be that day, Xiao Xiao said. I know third brother won't let him succeed. We haven't forgotten about ninth brother. Qi Feng looked at his sleeve. There will come a day when he will have to pay the debt that he owes us. Once they finished hunting, Qi Feng and Xiao Xiao returned to Luyang Villa. Xia Qing, who had come out of his seclusion to make medicine, was unexpectedly happy to see their bounty. This was because white wolf bone was a precious ingredient for making medicine, and so he immediately dragged the white wolf back to his room after saying that he would bring back the fur. Xiao Xiao had always been generous in dealing with these kinds of things, and except for the pelt, the rest was useless to him, so he immediately agreed. I heard that white wolves are hard to hunt, so how did you do it? Zhang Ruan had seen a white wolf skin in the palace in her previous life. Xianli had spent a large sum of money to purchase it from a merchant outside because it was very difficult to find a white wolf with unblemished snow-white fur. Back then, the immaculate white fur was indeed enviable, and Xianli had presented it to Imperial Consort Chun. Then Imperial Consort Chun took the fur and made it into a scarf. And with the fluffy warm scarf wrapped around her neck, even the emperor praised it. In any case, today Xiao Xiao merely went out to hunt and brought back a white wolf. As such, she could not resist feeling curious. Xiao Xiao glanced at her and said, "With an arrow." Jiang Ruan. When Xiao Xiao saw her speechless appearance, he couldn't resist laughing. Jiang Ruan glared at him. This man was deliberately teasing her again. Moving on, she recalled something and asked, I heard from Shifu that there were originally 9 fellow brothers. I just saw calligraphy and paintings of the other brothers in the attic. Why don't I see anything of 8th brothers? Zhang Ruan has seen almost all of Xiao Xiao's brothers, except for eldest senior brother, Xueda, and 6th brother, Du Lu, both of whom were roaming about and were presently not in Great Jin. But as soon as 8th brother and 9th brother were mentioned, Xia Qing would hem and haw, trying to evade the topic. Xia Qing was honest and not good at lying, so his evasive behavior was really strange in Zhang Ruan's eyes. So while chatting with Xiao Xiao, she suddenly thought of this matter and casually brought it up. After hearing her question, Xiao Xiao's expression changed slightly, and unexpectedly he did not immediately reply. Instead, he slowly knitted his brows. Zhang Ruan was taken aback and said, "If you don't want to say. 8th brother is Xian Li." Not waiting for her to finish speaking, Xiao Xiao interrupted her. 9th brother is actually a 9th sister. She died because of Xian Li, and after that incident, Xian Li was expelled from the sect by Shifu. Xiao Xiao's words were as concise and succinct as usual. A short statement from him was enough to make people's hearts tremble with fear and trepidation, such that even Zhang Ruan was shocked speechless by the weight and complexity of his reply. She had stayed with Xian Li for a long time in her past life, but she never knew that Xian Li and Xiao Xiao were brothers from the same sect, let alone that Xian Li and Xiao Xiao had been entangled in such a way. Seeing the look in her eyes, Xiao Xiao reached out to hold her soft, slender hand. His hands were also slender and well-defined, and not as rough as those of ordinary martial arts practitioners. Quite the contrary, he had smooth and powerful hands which were really pleasing to the eye. Zhang Ruan looked up at him. Xiao Xiao sighed and said, "Sit down, I'll tell you slowly." Even though teacher Ba Qi had retired to his native place and gone into seclusion on Mt. Jianan because he held the title of Oracle of the Heavenly Mandate, many people wanted to send their sons to Mt. Jianan to formally be accepted as a disciple under him. However, teacher Ba Qi had an eccentric personality and his criteria was that they had to be to his liking, otherwise, he would not accept them. Consequently, the 9 disciples who were finally accepted by teacher Ba Qi indeed had their own merits, and they were all giants among men. Renzhong Longfeng. Lit. Dragons and phoenixes among people, a giant among men, a superior or remarkable man who stands out from other men, a leader or exemplar for other men. Senior brother Shui was an eloquent itinerant political advisor. 2nd brother Guan had the bravery of a general. 3rd brother Xiao was the best assassin. 4th brother Qi had a talent for military stratagem. 5th brother Xia had medical skills that could cure any physical ailments and even bring a person back to life. 6th brother Du could make all kinds of hidden contraptions, concealed weapons and devices with his skillful hands. 7th brother Mo was an incredible intellectual. 8th brother Xian had the aura of an emperor, and 9th brother Bai inherited the mantle of teacher Ba Qi, and was schooled in the divination of destiny and heaven's will. Back then, 9th brother Bai was named Bai Zhu, and after being abandoned as a baby, Teacher Ba Qi brought her back to raise as his own daughter. Teacher Ba Qi had taken 8 male disciples, but Bai Zhu was the only female. Although MT Jianan had no distinction or segregation between male and female students, if this information was spread, ultimately it would influence how people would view Bai Zhu. So Teacher Ba Qi ordered her to dress up as a man, and within the sect, they would address each other as senior brother and junior brother. So in name she was 9th brother, but in fact she was 9th sister. As the only junior sister on MT Jianan, Bai Zhu was born intelligent and adorable, and under Teacher Ba Qi's tutelage and upbringing, she was innocent and childlike. All the senior brothers doted on Bai Zhu very much, and as the years passed Bai Zhu grew from a little girl to a beautiful young woman. No matter how she normally wore men's clothing, this couldn't hide the fact that she was a woman, and especially at such a young age, which girl didn't yearn for love? And so, no one knew when, but Bai Zhu fell in love with Xianli. Back then when Xianli was in MT Jianan, in all fairness, he was indeed a very outstanding young man. He was born handsome and elegant, and he also had the noble demeanor distinct to the royal family. What's even more rare was that he had no heirs at all, and treated others affably and courteously. It wasn't just Bai Zhu, but all of the brothers had sincerely befriended him back then. The disciples who grew up in MT Jianan were raised by Teacher Ba Qi to be very vivacious, broad-minded and not easily controlled. In comparison, Xiao Xiao and Xianli were more mature and restrained in behavior. However, when compared to the cold Xiao Xiao, it was obvious that Xianli, who was always smiling, made people feel more at ease. Bai Zhu was a girl who was guileless and unspoiled, and she had almost never had any contact with anyone from below the mountain. So her worldview reflected an almost gossamer kind of innocence and frailty. If she liked someone, she would like the person, and her feelings were very obvious. Thus, anyone with a discerning eye could see that Bai Zhu liked Xianli, so naturally Xianli noticed it too. However, if he didn't like her, he could have just told her. Instead, he did a hateful thing by using other people's feelings to further his own ulterior motives. From the very beginning, Xianli studied the governance of a monarch, and since he was a descendant of the royal family, there was nothing wrong with his choice of study. Bai Zhu was proficient in divination and hexagrams, but she couldn't predict her own future, nor the future of those close to her. Teacher Ba Qi said that it was destiny. While all the books in Teacher Ba Qi's attic could be flipped through at will, Teacher Ba Qi held back one in particular when teaching her. It was about the so-called pivotal lifeline and lineage of the emperor and the royal family. In fact, it was the astronomical divination of the dragon vein. No one knew when Xianli became interested in this matter. The scary thing was that he was only a teenager at the time, yet he was able to rein in his ambitiousness and set about plotting and working on his ultimate strategy. On the surface, he was friendly and respectful to his senior brothers of MT Jianan, but on the other hand, he secretly incited Bai Zhu to steal Teacher Ba Qi's astronomical divination chart. At that time Bai Zhu was only a young teenager, and she didn't understand the conspiracy and evilness of the human heart, let alone what Xianli's intention was in asking her to steal for him. She just thought it was as usual when an older brother asked her to steal something like a meal or a copper coin. Teacher Ba Qi was strict with his apprentices, but he was very tolerant and indulgent towards her. Bai Zhu was determined to steal the astronomical divination chart for Xianli, but she didn't expect that it was not an ordinary item, and there were hidden traps where the chart was stored. Bai Zhu only knew some basic defense skills, so there was no way that she could withstand those hidden poisonous weapons. Hence, she set off the traps and was immediately struck down. The poison had to be detoxified within an hour, and if Bai Zhu had been discovered earlier she wouldn't have died. But the astronomical divination chart was hidden in a secret room, and only Xianli knew that Bai Zhu had gone in there. He kept silent and didn't tell anyone because his plans had fallen through, and he was afraid that the incident would bring about more trouble for himself. It was only a day later that Bai Zhu was found dead, and it was revealed that she had died because of the hidden traps. At that time, Xianli said that he was totally unaware of the matter, but in the end Teacher Ba Qi was able to discover some inconsistencies. MT Jianan did not accept treacherous people as its disciples. What's more, he was clearly a two-faced person with a human face but a beast's heart. Bai Zhu was the daughter of Xianli's master, and she treated him with sincerity, but because of his insidiousness and selfishness, she lost her life in vain. Xianli adamantly refused to admit his guilt, but there was no evidence to incriminate him. Moreover, at that time, Imperial Consort Chun was favored and rising in her popularity, and should they have covertly dealt with Xianli, it would have only brought a heap of trouble to the disciples of Mt. Jianan. Baizhu was the younger sister to all of the sect brothers, and she had always been cherished and cared for like family. As such, her tragic death left all of them outraged and thirsty for revenge. It was not at all impossible for them to secretly act and have Xianli pay for a life with his life, but in the end it was teacher Ba Qi who came forward to stop the angry brothers. He said that he had already predicted long ago that such a day would arrive, and Baizhu's fate had such a variant that even if it was not Xianli it would have been someone else. Similarly, Xianli also had his own destiny. Subsequently, no one should interfere with the affairs of fate. On that day he planted the seed of cause and effect. In this way, there would inevitably come a day when accounts would be balanced and Xianli would taste the bitter fruit of defeat and suffer painful consequences. Renmian Shuxin. Human face, beast's heart, two-faced, malicious and duplicitous. Ultimately, in the end, teacher Ba Qi's words made the brothers dispel the idea of dealing with Xianli secretly. However, no one could continue to live with him on Mt. Jianan. Even if teacher Ba Qi was a saint, after harming the daughter he treated as his own, it was also impossible for him to remain indifferent. After this incident, Xianli was expelled from the sect, signifying that henceforth, Xianli had nothing to do with Mt. Jianan. From then on, whenever they ran across Xianli, the brothers would just treat him as a stranger. Baizhu's matter became a taboo subject on Mt. Jianan, and since then no one ever mentioned her. He used the same trick again, Zhang Ruan murmured, then suddenly realized that Xiao Xiao was looking at her, and found that what she said was wrong. She hurriedly said, "What I mean is that he has actually had such a scheming and insidious mind for a long time." The past that Zhang Ruan had recalled was arduously tortuous and weighty, and among those experiences, Baizhu and her past self shared almost identical situations. Didn't they both fall in love with the modest gentleman in their minds? Hadn't they drawn close to him with great joy and happiness, only to find out that he was a hungry wolf who ate people without spitting out their bones, and in the process losing their lives in vain? Suddenly her empathy made her feel sorrowful. It turned out that whether it was in the previous life or the present one, Xianli's methods were never aimed at her alone. He would make use of the sincerity of others to achieve his own goals, and both she and Baizhu were just a little bit more stupid, that's all. He is the enemy of Mt. Jianan. One day, this debt will be recovered, Xiao Xiao said with downcast eyes. Zhang Ruan looked at him askance, her beautiful eyes faintly lifted, seemingly with a hint of mischievousness. Xiao Xiao was a little unsettled by her stare, and asked, "What's wrong?" Ninth sister was clever and witty, innocent and unspoilt, and she was the treasure in the palm of all brothers, Zhang Ruan said slowly, but somehow she chose Xianli. How can you not compare to him? Xiao Xiao glanced at her with a helpless expression on his handsome face, and he thought for a moment before saying, "She was just a junior sister." Zhang Ruan shook her head and said, "You said ninth sister was very good, 1 in 100, but I think she had one bad thing, that is, she had bad eyesight." She looked at Xiao Xiao, and suddenly her indignation spurred and emboldened her as she stretched out her hand to pinch Xiao Xiao's cheeks and turned his head left and right. "If I were her, I would definitely not have chosen Xianli. What's so good about him?" "He is merely good at posturing and is pretentious," she said with a smile. "In my opinion, this face before me is much more beautiful, more elegant, way smarter, and definitely better in martial arts. And in terms of wealth, it is more than sufficient to defeat a country. Although your status is not comparable, nor is it of a royal nobility, still, it is just what I want." Although her usual smile was gorgeous, it always carried some estrangement. After waking up from a serious illness this time, she seemed to have changed, and she always smiled genuinely and unrestrainedly in front of Xiao Xiao. Her smile was as bright and charming as spring flowers and autumn moons, and the charm in her eyes was almost dazzling. Xiao Xiao couldn't help being slightly absent-minded after being pulled by her. but he didn't care about her rude behavior. Instead, he hugged her waist and smiled lightly. Just what you want. Zhang Ruan was taken aback and unconsciously pulled back her hand. Xiao Xiao raised his eyebrows, but he was a little happy. My pleasure. After saying that, he leaned down and lightly pecked her lips. Zhang Ruan? You hooligan. The days on MT Jianan was relaxed and pleasant, and it seemed that everything in the world could be temporarily forgotten. Every day was leisurely spent. This was the place where Xiao Xiao grew up. Xiao Xiao took her through the valley where he had cultivated in the past, as if in this way she could journey and grow up with him. However, the good times always flew by quickly. After Zhang Ruan fully recovered from her injuries, it was time to go down the mountain and return to the capital. On this special occasion, Xia Qing and Qi Feng were also returning to the capital together with them, and teacher Ba Qi was preparing to continue his retreat in seclusion. After Zhang Ruan was settled in the carriage, she leaned against Xiao Xiao and said, If everything is settled one day, I am more than willing to return here and stay for a longer time, especially since my frame of mind seems to be much more open. If you like it, I will bring you here often. Xiao Xiao patted her head. Zhang Ruan paused for a moment before saying, Actually, Xiao Xiao, I have hidden something from you. Xiao Xiao looked at her. It's my secret. I originally planned not to tell anyone in this life, but now I have changed my mind. Zhang Ruan lowered her head, wondering if she was avoiding Xiao Xiao's eyes. Her voice contained indescribable subtle emotions. I want to break the barrier between us, and I plan to tell you about it, but not now. After we have returned to the capital and I have dealt with a certain matter, then I will tell you. And after you have heard everything, no matter how you see or think of me, I'll accept your decision. Xiao Xiao was silent, then suddenly stretched out his hand, and gently but firmly turned her head to force her to look directly at him. His pitch-black eyes were bottomless like ripples that cascade out from within the calm water. Arwan, I don't care. If you feel hard-pressed and reluctant to do so, then there is no need for you to speak of it. He smiled lightly. No matter what happens in my eyes, you are you. Your so-called barrier has never existed in my heart. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.